Chapter 1365. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Unknowingly, Luo Fan felt that he had adapted to life in the mortal Golden Border City. Even Luo Fan could not count how many books were produced in the mortal world every day. Moreover, as time passed, the range of books that the cultivation wisdom could plunder continued to expand. In the beginning, it could only collect books from the great Qin kingdom that Luo Fan was in. However, after 3 years, all the books on the entire island had become its property. There were tens of thousands of countries on the island, and each country had thousands or even tens of thousands of cities like Golden Border City. The number of books that were produced at every moment was at least in the tens of thousands. Over the past 3 years, although Luo Fan read at an extremely fast speed, the number of books that the cultivation wisdom had accumulated was still many times more than before. An ordinary person would not be able to read 1/10 of the books, even if they read them for tens of thousands of years without rest. Of course, not all of the books were good books. Some of them were gibberish that could not be understood. However, Luo Fan did not care about those books at all. On this day, Luo Fan closed his book, which was a rare occurrence. He was playing with a little girl who often came to the inn to play. Suddenly, a ray of light descended from the sky. Then, an aura that he had sensed before appeared at the entrance of the inn. As soon as Luo Fan sensed the aura, he instantly knew who it was and could not help but smile. He said to the little girl, "Uncle has something to do now. Can you go and play first?" "Oh, goodbye, Uncle," the little girl said obediently. As she spoke, she hugged the snacks that Luo Fan gave her. Then, she turned around and ran out of the inn. "Greetings, Senior." At this moment, the person who suddenly arrived greeted at the entrance. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's nice to see an acquaintance again after 3 years. Come in. Why are you being so pretentious outside?" "Yes," Luo Fan replied calmly. Her words made Luo Fan realize that she had come prepared. Soon after, Qinin walked in gracefully and arrived beside Luo Fan. She bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Senior. You're not here to deliver an invitation again, are you?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "Not all. This time, I'm here to persuade Senior to attend my ascension ceremony," Qin said sternly. "Oh, you've come prepared. Tell me, how are you going to convince me?" Luo Fan had already guessed this, so he wasn't surprised at all. Back then, Senior said that you couldn't be sure what the Palace Lord was plotting, so you invited many fellow cultivators to the True Spirit Water Palace. This time, I have evidence to prove that the Palace Lord is behind this. It is indeed to discuss matters that concern the safety of the world, and we have invited all of you here. The zither voice said, "Evidence? Is there any evidence for this? Then take it out and let me have a look." Luo Fan closed cultivation wisdom and said faintly. He was indeed a little curious about what Qin was going to say to convince him. Perhaps she was going to take out something to convince him of the sincerity of the True Spirit Water Palace. Qin was obviously a little dissatisfied with Luo Fan's nonchalant attitude. However, she seemed to be mentally prepared. She just gritted her teeth and didn't show any other signs of displeasure. With a wave of her hand, she took out a strange item from the storage space she had opened up. The item looked like a pebble. It looked so ordinary. It was so ordinary that it looked like something that could be randomly picked up from the bank of an ordinary river. If such a pebble were to appear in the hands of a mortal, it would naturally be extremely normal. However, when it appeared in the hands of a level 1 pseudo-saint, it seemed so out of place. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved gently, and the pebble landed in his hand. He gently caressed the pebble, and it felt extremely warm to the touch, just like a piece of beautiful jade. Compared to its ordinary appearance, there was a world of difference, and they were two complete extremes. Luo Fan frowned, and his perception slowly permeated the pebble along his touch. The inside of the pebble did not seem much different from its appearance. It was also like an ordinary pebble, except that its structure was a little special, and it was more similar to a piece of beautiful jade. In other words, Luo Fan actually couldn't see anything unusual about the pebble at this moment. Luo Fan frowned and carefully sensed every detail on this cobblestone. From the inside to the outside, he carefully searched for any possible abnormalities in its interior. After a while, he suddenly frowned and discovered something that he had been neglecting. This cobblestone was indeed an extremely ordinary cobblestone. No matter how carefully one analyzed it, it was just an ordinary cobblestone. However, there were traces left behind by a strange grand Tao within it. The great Tao was generally similar to the great Tao of the Devil Realm, but there was an extremely strange feeling in it. It was as if the great Tao of the Devil Realm had been distorted by some strange mechanism. This pebble doesn't belong to this world. Luo Fan frowned. At that instant, a trace of admiration flashed in Qin Yin's eyes. However, it was quickly drowned out by her as she completely concealed it. She said, "That's right. I reported your suspicions back then, and the palace master gave me this item. If you're smart enough, you'll be able to see through this item and know that he wasn't lying." What great technique! Not only did it prove itself, but it also tested my knowledge. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. "Then, would you like to go to the spiritual water palace with me now? It's almost time for the enthronement ceremony." Qin Yin was overjoyed when she heard that. "Your palace master has personally proven it. If I don't go, I'll offend someone." "Fine, I'll go with you." Luo Fan sighed. Luo Fan had agreed to participate in the enthronement ceremony of the Spirit Water True Palace. Of course, it wasn't because he would offend anyone if he didn't participate. If he wasn't sure that he would be absolutely safe, he wouldn't have hesitated even if he had to offend a sage. The reason why he agreed to go, it was because of what he had sensed in the cobblestone. The traces of the great Tao left in the pebble showed that the pebble did not contain the great Tao of the Devil Realm. Moreover, it was not the great Tao of the Devil Realm, nor was it the great Tao of the other worlds in the Earth's universe. It was a great Tao that had nothing to do with the Earth's universe. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan instinctively thought of a name, Profound Yang World. All these years, he had encountered many things related to the Profound Yang World. He was already very curious about the Profound Yang World. At this time, when he suddenly discovered other things related to the Profound Yang World, he naturally wanted to participate in it. Qin Yin did not know this. She was overjoyed when she heard that Lu Fuan had agreed. The smile on her face almost melted the entire inn. She said with a smile, "That's great. Then let's start now. I'll lead the way for you, senior." Luo Fan chuckled and casually put the pet tortoise into his universe in his sleeve. He took the book and stood up. With his hands behind his back, he said, "What are we waiting for?" As he spoke, he took a step forward and arrived in midair. A magic cloud appeared under his feet. For a mortal, this was obviously the behavior of an immortal. Because this time, Luo Fan did not intend to hide it from the people in the city. Therefore, everyone in the city saw the abnormality here. For a moment, almost everyone spontaneously kowtowed in the direction of Luo Fan's location, mumbling the thought of asking Luo Fan to bless them. Senior, aren't you going to live in seclusion here? Why did you leave in such a high-profile manner? If that's the case, I'm afraid I can't stay here anymore." Qin Yin came to Luo Fan's side and was surprised to see this. Luo Fan said with a smile, "I'm going to participate in the matter that concerns the safety of the world. I don't even know if I'll lose my life there. How can I come back here to live in seclusion? I won't be able to come back after I leave this time. In that case, I might as well leave some traces of immortals here. It can be considered as leaving something for this city that I've lived in for hundreds of years." "Senior, you're so righteous," Qin Yin said with some shame. She suddenly felt a little guilty after hearing Luo Fan's words. It turned out that she had always wanted Luo Fan to participate in this matter, but she did not think about anything else. She finally understood that Luo Fan's participation in this matter was a good thing for the Spirit Water True Palace, as it would allow them to carry out their plan more smoothly. However, for Luo Fan, it was clearly dragging him into a dangerous situation where he did not know whether he would live or die. Whether he lived or died, he would never be able to return to his peaceful life at this moment. After understanding all this, she naturally felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. She felt as if she had caused Luo Fan to fall into such a predicament. Luo Fan naturally did not care about what Qin Yin was thinking. After asking for directions, he drove the magic cloud to fly into the distance. The magic cloud left a long trace in the void that did not disperse for a long time. Such a change made the people in Gold City even more convinced that it was the behavior of an immortal. They immediately kowtowed even more sincerely. Seemingly stimulated by Luo Fan's action of flying away, the distorted memories of the natural changes of the world also gradually recovered. For a time, the abnormality of that Luo Fan had lived in for hundreds of years began to be discovered by more and more people. The mysteriousness of the inn began to spread. Because of this, Gold City also had a place where immortals resided. It began to become famous in Daqing Kingdom and gradually became a famous tourist spot in Gold City. Countless people came to get a bit of immortal chi to become famous, but it made Gold City more and more prosperous. In the end, it even surpassed the capital of Daqing Kingdom. A few decades later, after the emperor of Daqing Kingdom abdicated, he even came to live in the inn where Luo Fan lived in seclusion. From then on, this became the residence of the retired emperor, and it became a permanent rule from this point. It could be said that the change in Luo Fan's behavior before he left had indeed brought great benefits to Gold City. It made all the people in Gold City remember his existence forever. They remembered that there was once an immortal who lived in seclusion in this city for a very long time and brought endless fortune to this city. These things were naturally things that happened in the future, but there was no need to talk about them. At this moment, under the guidance of Qin Yin, Luo Fan flew towards the spiritual water palace. "What is the name of your palace master?" Luo Fan asked along the way. "What is the name of your palace master?" Luo Fan asked along the way. These words. However, Qin Yin tried hard to provoke him again. Suddenly, she felt that her previous guilt towards Luo Fan was simply overthinking things. The spiritual water palace controlled this sea region and could be considered the overlord of this sea region. Anyone who asked around would know the name of the palace master of the spiritual water palace. However, 3 years ago, this person clearly knew that the spiritual water palace had invited him to participate in the enthronement ceremony of the new palace master, yet he didn't even ask about the situation of the spiritual water palace. This was simply not putting the spirit water true palace in their eyes. It would be strange if Qin Yin wasn't angry when she heard this. Yuan Venerate. My palace master's name is Yuan Venerate. Qin Yin's voice sounded as if she was speaking through her teeth. A Yuan Venerate is indeed a supreme level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. Luo Fan sighed with an inexplicable look on his face. He had seen quite a number of level 9 pseudo-saint level entities ever since he had stepped into the demon realm. The last time, he had almost been possessed by a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. His physical body had been snatched away. Now that he was about to see another level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, he couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic. You speak as if you are very familiar with a level 9 Venerate. Qin Yin couldn't help but complain when she saw Luo Fan's expression. Level 9 pseudo-saint level entities had a name in the demon realm, which was level 9 Venerate. This was also the reason why all level 9 pseudo-saint level entities had the word Venerate in their names. Although Luo Fan had seen many level 9 pseudo-saint level entities. However, that was just an exception. In fact, it was very common to see level 9 pseudo-saint level entities in the demon realm. Apart from the disciples of level 9 pseudo-saint level entities, there were only level 9 pseudo-saint level entities themselves. Even Qin Yin, who had been in a sect with level 9 venerates for so many years, had seen a few level 9 pseudo-saint level entities. She could count them on one hand. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for her to believe that a mere level 4 pseudo-saint level entity could see level 9 venerates frequently. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't care about how Qin Yin criticized him. Qin Yin treated it as an honor to see a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. She felt that it was something to be proud of. However, he had never thought so. To him, Every time he saw a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, it was accompanied by an inexplicable danger. Back then, before he had entered the demon realm, he had seen the clone of the Venerate. He had almost died. After entering the demon realm, he had seen Lu Xun's clone, who was fighting with the Venerate. He had also been in a sorry state and was on the brink of death. After that, he had encountered level 9 pseudo-saint level entities several times, and it was also accompanied by life-threatening danger. If he had made any mistakes, he would have been crushed in a powder and wouldn't be able to exist in this world anymore. Under such circumstances, how could he feel that it was an honor to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator? How could he want to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity? Of course, it was only superficial to explain Luo Fan's mentality based on his past experiences. The real reason why Luo Fan wasn't willing to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity was that a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity was too powerful for him at the moment. They were so powerful that he couldn't resist them at all. They were so powerful that he would be like an ant in front of a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. He wouldn't even be able to control his own life. It would be a joke for Luo Fan, who pursued transcendence, freedom, and eternity, to welcome such an encounter. Luo Fan was grateful for meeting a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, while Qin was displeased by Luo Fan's bragging. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The spiritual water palace was extremely far away from the island that Luo Fan was on. As they flew, Luo Fan felt that they had flown for hundreds of millions of kilometers. Qin suddenly said, "This is the place." Hearing that, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he stopped the auspicious cloud. He looked around and found that he and Qin had stopped at an empty sea area. Apart from the seawater below, there was nothing around them. There was no trace of the spiritual water palace at all. Looking at Luo Fan's confused expression, Qin became a little proud and said, "The spiritual water palace isn't on the surface of the sea, but at the bottom of the sea." With a reminder, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. That's indeed the case. The spiritual water palace. If it's not in the water, it wouldn't live up to its name. He looked down at the sea below and saw that it seemed very normal at first glance. It was just an ordinary sea area, and it was just an ordinary sea area. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that his line of sight seemed to be distorted somehow. This distortion made him unknowingly neglect certain things. Unfortunately, although Luo Fan knew what was at the bottom of the sea, he also knew that the approximate location of that thing was close to the bottom of the sea. However, he couldn't find that thing no matter how hard he tried, let alone see what that thing really looked like and enter it. Chapter 1366. I still have a long way to go. Luo Fan sighed and gave up his position to Qin. It was not a big deal to admit defeat under such circumstances. Luo Fan did not feel embarrassed at all. After all, he was only a level 4 pseudo-holiness. It was only natural that he could not find a way to break through a level 9 pseudo-holiness defense. It would be terrifying if he could find a way. Qin was obviously aware of this as well. She was not surprised that Luo Fan admitted that he could not open up a path. She calmly took out a jade token and injected her power into it. The jade token floated in the air and trembled slightly, stirring up the surrounding space-time. As the space-time stirred, the space-time at a spot close to the bottom of the sea that Luo Fan had sensed earlier began to change. Following that, a ray of light shot out from that spot and turned into a 10-meter-tall door in front of Luo Fan. Qin smiled when she saw the door. She said, "Senior, please." Luo Fan let out a sigh of admiration, and together with the zither sound, they rode a magic cloud into the space-time portal. There was nothing much to say about the process of passing through the space-time door. When Luo Fan could see his surroundings clearly, a strange world appeared in front of him. This world was boundless and boundless. At first glance, it did not seem any different from a normal world. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that everything in this world was made up of water. Moreover, this water was not ordinary water. Furthermore, it wasn't ordinary water. It had all sorts of properties, all sorts of oddities, high and low. There were all sorts of pure water, spirit water, weak water, and so on. These various types of water, according to their special characteristics, formed all kinds of strange substances in this world, and even formed countless strange creatures that were made up of all kinds of water with all kinds of special characteristics. What a spiritual water palace! Luo Fan finally praised, opening up a world. Even if one used one of the four basic existences, time, space, matter, or energy, to construct a world. For Luo Fan, it was not difficult at all. However, although he had thought about using water to form the world, he had never really studied how to do it. Now, he realized that this world was right in front of him. That feeling, one could imagine. He casually grabbed at his surroundings. When the time water fell into his hands, he felt as though he was holding time in his hands from the outside world. He relaxed slightly, and a stream of water with spatial characteristics swept past him. The water of time was swept away, fused with it, and redistributed, forming a strange space-time. Hearing Luo Fan praise this world, Zithernote was clearly very pleased. She smiled and said, "This world is the foundation of the spiritual water true palace." Back then, the patriarchs of our palace spent hundreds of billions of years to build it. On the day that this world was successfully created, there were even disciples of the sages who came because of its fame. In this regard, Luo Fan once again nodded in admiration. At this moment, a celestial light descended from the sky, and celestial music resounded throughout the world. Various fragrances filled the air, illuminating the place where Luo Fan and Zithernote stood like a fairyland. "It's our palace's welcoming disciples who are here to welcome Senior," Zithernote hurriedly explained, as she was afraid that Luo Fan would misunderstand. Luo Fan had long noticed this. He merely smiled and nodded. Not long after, more than a dozen men and women emerged from the void in the distance with all kinds of gorgeous objects in their hands. They gracefully flew forward and gave a complicated greeting to Luo Fan. After a while, all kinds of gifts were presented. They were extremely precious to ordinary people, but for existences like Luo Fan, they could only be regarded as interesting gifts. Then, the level 2 pseudo-sage young man who was leading the group said to Luo Fan, "The ceremony is about to begin. I wonder if Senior wants to take a rest first, or head straight to the venue of the ceremony." "Let's head straight to the ceremony." Since the ceremony was about to begin, what was the point of cultivating for a while? The young man was overjoyed. He brought Luo Fan and Zithernote in a certain direction. Along the way, Zithernote said to Luo Fan, "I've completed my task, so I won't disturb Senior any further. I'll be taking my leave now." Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "What else do you want to do next?" "Nothing else," said Zithernote. "Since there's nothing else, why don't you join me in the ceremony? I'm not familiar with this place. You're the only one who's familiar with this place, so we can talk," said Luo Fan with a faint smile. Zithernote was overjoyed and said, "Thank you, Senior." "Huh? Don't tell me a level 1 pseudo-sage like you is not qualified to join the ceremony? That doesn't make sense," said Luo Fan with a frown. He suddenly guessed something when he saw Zithernote's joyful expression. Even if there was a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator, the Spirit Water True Palace would not be so extravagant as to ignore a level 1 pseudo-sage disciple. Moreover, even if the Spirit Water True Palace ignored Zither Sound, as a legacy disciple of the Spirit Water True Palace, Zither Sound should be qualified to participate in the enthronement ceremony. "Senior, you may not know this, but Junior Sister Melody made a huge mistake this time, so she was punished by the Palace Master to not participate in the enthronement ceremony." The level 2 pseudo-sage cultivator who was talking to Luo Fan said carefully, "I see. It seems like you've made quite a big mistake. I can't believe you're not allowed to participate in such a big event." Luo Fan came to a realization and looked at Zithernote with a strange gaze. The enthronement ceremony of the next Palace Master would almost determine the situation of the Spirit Water True Palace for the next 100 billion years. Even an ordinary outer disciple would be qualified to participate in such a big event. Zithernote was a level one pseudo-sage, and her cultivation base was billions of times stronger than an ordinary outer disciple. Yet she was disqualified. How big a mistake did she make? It was simply unimaginable. However, he didn't ask too much about it. He just brushed it off with a single sentence. For existences like them, their speed was already beyond the imagination of mortals. Even though the place where they entered was quite far from where the enthronement ceremony would be held. In less than the time for an incense stick to burn, they had already arrived at the place where the enthronement ceremony would be held. This was a huge group of palaces. The enthronement ceremony would be held in front of the largest palace in this group of palaces. There was an extremely spacious plaza there. At this moment, there were tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people bustling in and out of the palace complex. On the square of the largest palace, there were already hundreds of extraordinary cultivators seated. They looked calm and were conversing with each other through their thoughts. On the surface, it seemed quiet. However, it was bustling inside. Between the many seats, there were a few female pseudo-sage cultivators serving fruits and juices. It was quite lively. Apart from these cultivators and the cultivators serving them, there was another person on the square. There was also a man who seemed to be in his 30s. A man whose cultivation had already reached the level 8 pseudo-sage level was standing in between the many positions and searching. He was making small talk with the cultivators. That's the next palace master of your spiritual water palace, right? Luo Fan glanced at the square and asked Zithernote. Yes. Zithernote paused for a while before replying. Why? You two don't get along? That shouldn't be the case. He's a level 8 pseudo-sage, and you're only a level 1 pseudo-sage. There shouldn't be much interaction between the two of you. Luo Fan said when he saw that Zithernote's expression was strange. Ahem. The man at the side coughed softly. Zithernote was startled by the cough and seemed to have reacted. She smiled and said, That's right. That's right. How could there be anything wrong? I was just thinking about something and got distracted. Please forgive me, Senior. Hearing this, Luo Fan knew that she wasn't telling the truth. However, he was just curious and would not pursue the matter further. Since she didn't want to say anything, he would just let it go. At this moment, the level 8 pseudo-sage cultivator noticed Luo Fan's arrival. He said something to the cultivator he was chatting with and came forward to express his gratitude and apology. He thanked Luo Fan for giving him face by attending his ascension ceremony. He also kissed Luo Fan because he was too busy and had too many people to greet him. He asked Luo Fan to forgive him for his lack of manners. These words were spoken in a decent and generous manner. Even if one was unhappy, they would quickly be appeased. Moreover, Luo Fan wasn't unhappy at all. After the Grade 8 Fall Sage talked for a while, the Grade 8 Fall Sage personally led Luo Fan to a seat near the front and sat down. After that, he apologized once more before taking his leave. Faintly, Luo Fan heard the sound of the zither snort behind him. However, when he thought about it carefully, it seemed to be an illusion. Junior sister. The man who greeted Luo Fan hadn't gone far yet. He seemed to have heard the voice and called out softly. I got it. Qin Yin's expression changed, and she didn't say anything else. That level 2 pseudo-holy saint apologized to Luo Fan again before shooting a warning glance at Qin Yin. Then, he turned around and left. Tell me about those cultivators. I don't know anyone here. Luo Fan didn't care about them. He asked Qin Yin to sit down and said to her, Among the hundreds of cultivators, none of them were weaker than level 3 pseudo-sage. Among these cultivators, Luo Fan had never seen a single one of them before. Therefore, Luo Fan didn't know any of them. He was waiting for the ceremony to begin and felt a little bored. Hence, it was better for him to get to know the other cultivators first. Qin Yin wasn't as ignorant as Luo Fan. She knew all of these cultivators very well and introduced them to Luo Fan one by one. As she introduced them, Luo Fan gradually learned who these cultivators were and couldn't help but praise them in his heart. He didn't expect the spiritual Water True Palace to be so powerful. They had so many cultivators scattered across such a vast area, yet they were still able to find them and invite them over. However, when he thought about how he was also found, he felt that it wasn't a big deal. Your next palace master is very suitable to control the spiritual water true palace. After a while, Luo Fan sighed. Senior, why do you say that? Chinyin was sitting slightly behind Luo Fan. Luo Fan didn't turn around, so he couldn't see her expression. Isn't that so? A powerful level 8 pseudo-sage cultivator. He's able to greet cultivators who are so much weaker than him with a smile and put them in a higher position. Isn't this the attitude of a good leader? Luo Fan said with a smile. When he met the level 8 pseudo-sage just now, the latter's performance was too natural, so he didn't notice the huge difference in strength between him and the level 8 pseudo-sage. It was only now that he noticed this after witnessing Chu Li's extravagant behavior. Normally, the difference between a level 4 pseudo-sage and a level 8 pseudo-sage was like the difference between heaven and earth. The difference between mud and clouds was equally huge. Under such circumstances, a level 8 pseudo-sage should treat a level 4 pseudo-sage like an ant. However, this level 8 pseudo-sage could actually smile at a level 3 pseudo-sage. This wasn't something an ordinary level 8 pseudo-sage could do. Is this how a real leader should behave? Chinyin's voice seemed to be mixed with some disapproval. You seem to have a different opinion? Why don't you tell me? Luo Fan said with a smile. He's actually a hypocrite. He's just doing this to rope in others. You're just trying to recruit someone else. Melody could no longer hold back her anger. Rope in others? What does that mean to him? Luo Fan said with a smile. What does that mean to him? Luo Fan laughed. What does that mean to him? Luo Fan said with a smile. Because he snatched the position of Palace Lord from my master. Because he took the position of Palace Lord from my master back then. If he can't rope in enough people to support his argument, the Yuan Venerate Ancestral Master will definitely remove him from the position of Palace Lord and choose my master again. Qin Yin's voice sounded like it was coming out from the gaps between her teeth. Where there are people, there will be Jianghu. Luo Fan could only sigh with emotion at this time. He finally understood what was going on. Why would a level 1 pseudo-sage like Qin Yin be prohibited from participating in the enthronement ceremony of the next Palace Lord? It wasn't because she had made a big mistake, but because her mouth was too big. She had actually dared to say such things in front of Luo Fan, just because she had a little friendship with Luo Fan. If she was allowed to participate in the enthronement ceremony freely, she might say something else that would definitely be a disaster for the Spirit Water True Palace. I see. It seems like you have a good relationship with your master. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about anything else. Of course, master is like a mother to me. Qin was no longer as angry as before. Instead, there was a tinge of admiration in her voice. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. You're quite lucky to be able to meet someone who is like your mother at this stage. Qin seemed to be nodding when she heard that, but she didn't say anything else. After Luo Fan finished this sentence, he no longer had any interest in talking, and the two of them became silent. Soon enough, the auspicious time for the enthronement ceremony arrived. As an enthronement ceremony, it was naturally the abdication ceremony of the previous Palace Lord. Therefore, the first procedure of the enthronement ceremony was for the previous Palace Lord to abdicate. While Luo Fan was sitting on the square, the palace complex had undergone a huge change. The biggest palace had unknowingly appeared high up in the sky. Below them were stretches of auspicious clouds that were filled with the numerous disciples of the spiritual water true palace. As Luo Fan swept his gaze over, he discovered that there were probably millions of these disciples. Even the weakest among them was an innate Grand Luo. These disciples made up 90% of the disciples. Following that, 99% of the remaining disciples were at the demi-sage level. The remaining few hundred people were pseudo-saint level cultivators. Even among these pseudo-saint level cultivators, most of them were level 1 or level 2 pseudo-saint level. There were only a dozen or so pseudo-saint level cultivators. Although this level of strength was terrifying, it was nothing compared to the hundreds of pseudo-saint level cultivators sitting on the square, who were at least level 3 pseudo-saint level. If a battle were to break out, even the next palace lord wouldn't be able to gain much of an advantage. Unless the Yuan Venerate disregarded his status and made a move, he would be able to suppress the hundreds of cultivators in front of the palace. After the enthronement ceremony began, the seats that Luo Fan and the others were seated on were naturally separated and arranged on both sides. The many disciples of the Spirit Water True Palace also went to their original designated seats, creating a splendid and lively scene. At this point, the figure of the Yuan Venerate gradually appeared at the entrance of the hall. The Yuan Venerate was a beautiful young woman who looked to be in her mid-30s. She exuded a gorgeous charm from head to toe. As she stood there, she naturally exuded an aura that seemed to encompass everything in the universe. The aura of a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator was displayed without a doubt, making all the cultivators present shudder. No one dared be negligent in the face of a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator, even though she had been invited. They immediately got up and bowed to the Yuan Venerate. The Yuan Venerate didn't exchange pleasantries with them. After returning the greeting, she said, "Thank you, everyone, for coming to witness the enthronement of our new palace lord. I will remember your kindness. I will definitely repay you in the future." After saying that, she didn't waste any time and immediately instructed the person who had arranged the ceremony to start. Chapter 1367. Perhaps because there were still other matters to attend to, the enthronement ceremony was only held for 3 days. Qinyin seemed to know a little more, so she didn't cause any trouble during the enthronement ceremony. Although she expressed her displeasure and disdain for the level 8 pseudo-sage on the stage from time to time in Luo Fan's ears, it didn't affect the ceremony at all. Over the past 3 days, Luo Fan had displayed a magnificent ceremony in front of him, which made him feel that he seemed to have a deeper understanding of the many sects in the demon realm. He also had a better understanding of the culture of these sections. 3 days later, the majority of the Spiritual Water True Palace's disciples naturally retreated, while the palace that was used to hold the ceremony once again descended into the cluster of palaces. The entire world had also returned to how it was when Luo Fan had first seen it, just as Luo Fan was wondering when Yuan Venerate would appear. Yuan Venerate appeared in front of many cultivators. "Thank you all for coming. If it hadn't been for the safety of the realm, I wouldn't have bothered all of you with such a grand ceremony." The Yuan Venerate spoke calmly to the hundreds of pseudo-saint level cultivators present. Qinyin naturally couldn't still be by Luo Fan's side during such an occasion. She had already left a long time ago, and no one knew where she had gone. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't have the right to speak. Naturally, other cultivators would speak first. As soon as Yuan Venerate finished speaking, a cultivator said, "Senior Yuan Venerate, you're too polite. I just don't know what is so important. This matter has something to do with the demon realm." Yuan Venerate smiled. "Demon realm?" Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. His heart skipped a beat when he heard this. This world was considered the demon realm in the Earth universe. Yet the beings in the demon realm were saying that there was another demon realm? What kind of world was that? Could it be the Earth universe? Demon realm? Senior Yuan Venerate, are you serious? The person who spoke couldn't help but exclaim. By now, Luo Fan had already recognized the person who had spoken to the Yuan Venerate. Although his cultivation base wasn't as good as a Yuan Venerate's, it was only slightly worse. His cultivation base was at the level 8 pseudo-saint level. He was on par with the new palace master of the Spirit Water True Palace. "This is a very important matter. Why would I lie?" The Yuan Venerate replied calmly. "Junior has been rude." Hearing that, the level 8 pseudo-sage knew that he had said something wrong. He said hurriedly, "Many people already know about the existence of the demon realm, but there are also some people who don't understand. I will explain it to everyone now," the Yuan Venerate said. Everyone naturally gave him face and thanked the Yuan Venerate for his guidance. Following that, the Yuan Venerate shared all the information she knew about the demon realm. Hearing this, not only the others, but even Luo Fan also came to a sudden realization. So, this was the demon realm that the Yuan Venerate had mentioned. It was not the Earth's universe, nor was it any world in the Earth's universe. any heaven and earth. It was different from the Earth's universe. It was another perfect heaven and earth that had been created in a state of chaos. Of course, that heaven and earth was not evil in nature. It also did not have the demonic intent that the world knew. However, that heaven and earth were different from the Earth's universe and the demon realm. So it was naturally a demon. Therefore, in the eyes of a cultivator born and raised in the demon realm like the Yuan venerate, the other perfect heaven and earth was obviously the true demon realm. After understanding this, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed as he had a faint guess. The demon realm. He was afraid that it had something to do with the mysterious Yang heaven and earth. This explanation didn't take long. Very soon, the Yuan venerate finished speaking. Then, she said, the demon realm had invaded our realm in ancient times and caused great harm to our realm. It even almost caused the realm to be completely destroyed. This time, the palace master found traces of a world created by the remnants of the demon realm and felt that it was very likely that the demon realm would make a comeback. Therefore, she sent me to investigate. I believe that everyone is very clear about the final outcome, so I won't say anything more. This time, I asked all of you to come here to attack that world and find the remnants of the demon realm. I want to wipe them out and restore clarity to this realm. A world created by another perfect heaven and earth cultivator? Luo Fan frowned. If that world could make a level 9 pseudo-saint, like the Yuan venerate, return and defeat, then it was no ordinary danger. If cultivators like them went there, they would most likely be like sheep walking into a tiger's den. Since it is so dangerous, I wonder why Senior Yuan venerate didn't report this to the sage. If a sage was involved, this would only be a small matter, the level 8 pseudo-saint said. The Yuan venerate smiled bitterly when he heard this. How could I not have thought of this when this matter is so important? However, the sage is supreme. How could he meet a sage without any concrete information? How could the sage pay attention to some information that I reported? This matter is so important. Even if there isn't any concrete information, the sage would still pay some attention to it. The level 8 pseudo-saint said uncertainly. We are not saints, so how would we know how much information the saints encounter every day like us? The sage is omnipotent. Why would he waste his energy on this? The Yuan venerate sighed. Even Luo Fan was speechless when he heard this. The sage was not a babysitter who would handle anything that was reported to the sage. The world was so vast. Although 54 sages seemed like a lot, it was unimaginable how much territory each sage could control if they were spread across the entire world. In these areas, there would definitely be unimaginable amounts of matters that needed to be reported to the sage every day. If the saint had to deal with every single matter and ask about it, would he still need to cultivate? Would he still have his own freedom? Was he still a sage? Therefore, it was obvious that there wouldn't be any results from reporting the discovery of the remnants of the demon realm, unless they could find more evidence to prove that this matter could endanger the entire world and prove that this was something they couldn't handle. Only then would there be a 1 in a million chance that the sage would turn his attention to this sea region. Only then would there be a 1 in a million chance that the sage would help them deal with this matter. Everyone present was at least a level 3 pseudo-saint. Naturally, they wouldn't be unwise. How could they not understand the Yuan venerate's words? At that moment, everyone fell silent. After a while, the level 8 pseudo-saint said, I wonder what instructions Senior Yuan venerate has for us? Although we have some abilities, we are still insignificant compared to a Yuan venerate. Even a Yuan venerate would find this troublesome. I don't think we can be of much help. The Yuan venerate said, this matter requires the help of all of you. She did not pretentiously praise their cultivation. That was obvious. If she had praised them, it would not have made them happy, but would have made them angry as if they were treated as fools. Instead, she directly said that she needed their help. The world created by the remnant of the demon realm is of a very high level, and it has countless layers of pseudo-holy grade defenses. With my abilities, it is indeed possible for me to break through them. But once the main body used all of its power to break through these defenses, after entering the world, it would not be able to do so. He was afraid that he would not be able to fight against the remnants of the demon world. Therefore, I hope that everyone can help me break the defenses of the realm so that I can free up my hands and feet and conserve my energy to fight the remnants of the demon realm, the Yuan Venerate said. Hearing this, everyone present understood. This time, the grade 8 pseudo-martial sage would naturally not speak up for everyone. Naturally, he could casually answer the questions he had asked before. However, if he were to say something that required everyone's help, it would seem like he didn't know what was good for him and was overstepping his bounds. After all, even though his cultivation level was the highest among the hundreds of people here, he was still a Taoist. But after all, he was not the leader of everyone present, so how could he make decisions for them? Of course, since everyone present was willing to participate in the enthronement ceremony, they were already mentally prepared. Naturally, no one would dare to voice a different opinion. Therefore, everyone explained and agreed to help. After this, the grade 8 pseudo-martial sage then asked, "How should we cooperate? This matter can only be confirmed after we see the heavens and earth. Since everyone is willing to help, why don't we not delay any further and head directly to that realm to study it?" The Yuan Venerate said with a smile. Everyone naturally agreed. The Yuan Venerate did not delay any further. He immediately opened a huge space-time portal at the entrance of the hall. It led straight to a boundless sea region. There was an aura that no one was familiar with coming from the door. It was the aura of the demon realm. Obviously, this space-time portal did not directly connect to the realm they wanted to go to. Instead, it connected to the demon realm and the place where they had entered the mountain gate of the Spirit Water Palace. At that moment, more than 10 pseudo-martial sages suddenly appeared beside the Yuan Venerate. Among these cultivators, there were at least grade 4 pseudo-martial sages, and there were even 2 grade 8 pseudo-martial sages with high cultivation levels. The 2 grade 8 pseudo-martial sages were a man and a woman. The aura of the woman was somewhat familiar to Luo Fan, as if he had sensed this aura before. Suddenly, Luo Fan reacted. This was clearly Qin Yin's aura. Could it be that this person is Qin Yin's master, who was like a mother and daughter to Qin Yin, and was later robbed of the position of the next palace master? Luo Fan's eyes flashed as he thought of this. The Spirit Water Palace had more females than males. Among the cultivators, there were many times more females than males. From this point of view, it was not easy for the next palace master to climb up the ranks of such a sect and eventually squeeze out all the other competitors to occupy the highest position. The Yuan Venerate did not cross the space-time portal first. Instead, she let the disciples under her enter the portal and appear above the demon realm's sea region. Then, she invited the other cultivators to cross the portal one by one. In the end, she left the realm and arrived above the sea region. The Yuan Venerate had obviously done her homework. She knew everyone present, even Luo Fan, who she had never seen before, but she could still call him out in a very friendly manner. This made Luo Fan secretly admire her. He rarely revealed his name in this region of the sea. Under such circumstances, it was obviously not easy for the Yuan Venerate to find out his name. After everyone arrived above the sea, the Yuan Venerate raised her hand. The Yuan Venerate raised his hand and gestured. As the seawater below surged, a passageway formed by seawater appeared in front of them and extended for thousands of feet. It was directly embedded in the void, as if it had penetrated through space-time and arrived at an incredible place that was extremely far away. Almost everyone present could control water like this. However, not many people had the ability to do it so naturally and casually. This alone was enough to show how mysterious the Yuan Venerate's methods were. This passage leads to that realm. Everyone, please enter, the Yuan Venerate said after forming the passage. This time, the process was the same as before. The disciples of the Spiritual Water Palace entered the passage first, followed by the other cultivators, and finally, the Yuan Venerate herself. This time, the process was the same as before. The disciples of the Spiritual Water Palace entered the passage first, followed by the other cultivators, and finally, the the Yuan venerate herself. Luo Fan did not act alone. Instead, he acted like an ordinary level 4 pseudo-sage. He stepped into the passageway and flew towards the end of the passageway. Since they might have to work closely together in the future, the many cultivators naturally couldn't care less about themselves. Therefore, even though the journey wasn't long, almost all the cultivators used various means of communication to get to know each other. They were all pseudo-sage existences. This kind of communication was naturally not as troublesome as it was with ordinary mortals. It didn't take long for everyone to gain a good understanding of each and every one of them. Although it was impossible to deepen their understanding, it was also impossible to establish a deep friendship in such a short amount of time. However, at the very least, they had a rough understanding of each other's personalities. Among them, many people would naturally look at each other in the eye because of this kind of communication. They felt that the other party's personality was compatible with theirs, so they wanted to further understand each other. Luo Fan was no exception. During this understanding, he discovered that a few cultivators were people he could befriend, so he exchanged a few more words with each other. Those few cultivators, they weren't level 4 pseudo-sages, but level 6 or level 7 pseudo-sages. They were existences that seemed to be many times stronger than Luo Fan in terms of cultivation realm. Only these people, who didn't care too much about the difference in strength, could make Luo Fan feel that they were people he could befriend. Since they all wanted to have a deeper understanding of each other, they naturally gathered together. There were 5 men and 2 women, a total of 7 people. I knew that Taoist Luo Fan was so interesting. I should have chatted with you earlier, the level 6 pseudo-sage female named Yang Shizi said. Not only that, if I knew that you were all so interesting, I wouldn't have been so bored earlier, another level 7 pseudo-sage named Taoist Yixin sighed. It's not too late now, another level 7 pseudo-sage female named Jiran said with a smile. That's right, that's right. Everyone laughed. Apart from Luo Fan and the others also formed their own groups, trying their best to build friendships with as many people as possible that they felt they could trust. Apart from having similar personalities and feeling that they were all people they could befriend, it was more because they knew that they might encounter great danger later on. This danger was so strong that they didn't have the confidence to face it alone. That was why they wanted to gather more trustworthy people to help and support each other. This was actually the reason why they were so anxious to build a deeper friendship with others at this time. Everyone was naturally aware of this, as if they were watching a fire from the other side of the river. However, everyone did not care about this at all, and they did not point out this point. After all, although the reason why they were so anxious to build a friendship was due to benefits. But this didn't mean that they were not sincere to each other. It didn't mean that they were forcing themselves, and it didn't mean that they were acting. In fact, they were still sincere to each other. The friendship that they wanted to establish was not a gesture that they purposely put on for the sake of benefits. Compared to the long time they usually had to build a friendship, now that they were in danger, they only needed to build a friendship that would normally take a long time to build in a short period of time. Although this was a little unnatural for them, there was nothing to discuss. The space-time passage was not very long. In just a few days, they had passed through the passage and arrived at the end of the passage. Here, there was a huge platform that looked like an ice crystal connected to the passage. On this platform, a layer of space-time that was not too thick or too big was formed from pure water. This was to provide a foothold for the cultivators. Outside the space-time range of this platform was a strange fog. There was only a vast and high-level world in front of the platform. This world was obviously a vast thousand world. However, it was many times more stable and vast than an ordinary vast thousand world. The whole world was like a huge planet floating in front of the platform. There was also fog on it. However, compared to the fog in other places, the fog here seemed to be a little more orderly. There seemed to be traces of strange lines faintly flashing across it, forming an extremely wonderful, yet unimaginable, faintly discernible formation. This was obviously the world that the so-called remnants of the demon world had opened up. It was also the goal of many cultivators like them. What a great world! A world like this is not much different from our origin world. After Yang Shizi stood still, he couldn't help but sigh. Chapter 1368. When the last person stepped onto the platform, when the cultivator stepped onto the platform, the Yuan Venerate also stepped onto the platform. Obviously, if she had used her original speed, she might have even stepped onto the platform before everyone else. However, she didn't do so in order to make everyone feel at ease. Instead, she stepped onto the platform at the same time as the last person. After the Yuan Venerate stood still, he said to everyone, "This is the realm created by the remnants of the demon realm. The formations on it were layered on top of one another. They could be destroyed or reborn at any moment. There were millions of changes at every moment. If one could not destroy all of them at once, it would be impossible to destroy them. Therefore, we need all of you to attack at the same time." At that moment, a level 8 pseudo-sage raised his hand and shot a ray of light towards the realm shrouded in fog. That ray of light contained the terrifying might of a level 8 pseudo-sage. In any other position, destroying hundreds of great thousand realms would be a piece of cake, let alone destroying a great thousand realm. However, this ray of light was like a stone thrown into a peaceful sleep when it entered the fog. Although it set off layers of ripples, it didn't cause any damage to the realm at all. After a short while, the ripples dissipated and the realm in front of them returned to its normal state, exactly as it had been before it had been attacked. What a strong defense! The level 8 pseudo-sage exclaimed in surprise. It wasn't that he didn't trust the Yuan Venerate, but as a cultivator, he couldn't feel at ease without testing it out. After the level 8 pseudo-sage, other cultivators had continued to use mystic techniques to attack the realm. Even Luo Fan was no exception. He also raised his hand and unleashed the strongest destructive mystic technique he could currently master and blasted it toward the realm in front of him. This mystic technique was a combination of his understanding of the state of primal chaos. Billions of realms were born and destroyed almost all the time, turning it into absolute destructive power. Just this spirit ability alone was not any weaker than the spirit ability that the level 8 pseudo-sage spirit beast could unleash. This mystic technique looked like a colorless and transparent light. It was completely connected to Luo Fan's mind, so all the changes of the mystic technique were completely displayed in his mind. The moment the divine ability came into contact with the countless threads in the sky and earth, he felt it. Countless mysterious changes appeared on the threads, and countless strange mechanisms instantly took effect on his divine powers. All the power contained in his divine powers was instantly drawn away and completely melted into the surface of the world, making the countless layers of formations on the surface of the world bear the power of those divine powers at the same time. In the end, there are only a few ripples for a level 4 pseudo-sage cultivator. Such ripples were truly unimaginably powerful. None of the cultivators present were ordinary mortals, so they naturally wouldn't be unable to distinguish who had unleashed each attack, just because there were too many attacks. For a moment, the gazes directed at Luo Fan changed. "I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Looks like we've picked up a treasure this time around," Yang Shizi exclaimed in shock. "It's just some secret techniques." It wasn't easy to explain, so this was all Luo Fan could say. "Not bad, not bad. We'll have to rely on Taoist Luo Fan's protection later," Taoist Jixin chimed in. The others also nodded in agreement. Luo Fan could only say helplessly, "Are you guys making fun of me?" "Ha ha." Everyone laughed when they heard this. As they spoke, many cultivators had already tested the defensive capabilities of the sky and earth. At this time, the Yuan Venerate saw that no one else was testing it, so he said, "Since everyone has tested it, I will start making arrangements. This matter is of great importance, and any carelessness could result in extremely serious consequences. Therefore, I hope that everyone will temporarily put aside their past disagreements and work together to break through this sky and earth." "Of course. Senior Yuan Venerate, please instruct us," everyone said. The Yuan Venerate nodded in satisfaction. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of spiritual lights rushed out of his hand and landed in front of all the cultivators present in the blink of an eye. There was also a spiritual light in front of Luo Fan. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and received the spiritual light. In an instant, a large amount of information flowed into his mind through the spiritual light. Given the amount of information, if it were to flow into the mind of an ordinary person, it would definitely cause a huge explosion that would cause a lot of white and red things to explode. However, this was not the case for Luo Fan at all. In the blink of an eye, he completely understood the information and grasped the content described in the information. This is the method of setting up an array formation. Luo Fan couldn't help but frown when he saw the content of the information. The information described a small portion of an extremely profound and inconceivable method of setting up a formation. This array was extremely profound and obscure. Even the current Luo Fan was confused by the profundities contained within it. It was difficult for him to know what exactly it was, and he didn't even know the specific effects of this array and what use it had. Obviously, this array formation contained many mysteries of a level 9 pseudo-sage. Such a mystery might be a great opportunity for a level 8 pseudo-sage cultivator, but for Luo Fan, it would only make him wary. He would never forget his encounter with the divine Venerate and his disciple, who were level 9 pseudo-sages. He would never forget how dangerous the technique that old man had given him was. If a level 9 pseudo-sage wanted to plot against someone, even a seemingly ordinary technique could contain a strong killing intent. If one was not careful, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. Under the circumstances, how could Luo Fan not be wary of this array formation technique that he couldn't understand at all? Obviously, Luo Fan wasn't the only one who thought this way. At that moment, a cultivator said, "Senior Yuan Venerate, it's not that I don't trust you, but this array formation technique is too profound. I can't understand it at all and don't know how to cultivate it. I hope you can give me some pointers." The person who spoke was a level 7 pseudo-sage. Luo Fan had communicated with him previously. The person who knew this was a cultivator called Ziji Z. So it's Taoist Ziji Z. I didn't think this through. This array formation was specially created by me to break through this realm. It is full of mysteries of this array formation and naturally contains a large number of level 9 pseudo-sages. I guess it's not just Taoist Ziji Z who has these doubts, but most of the fellow Taoists have the same doubts, the Yuan Venerate said. Upon hearing this, Luo Fan frowned slightly. It seemed like she wasn't as open-minded as she appeared. It wasn't that she wasn't angry. At that moment, the Yuan Venerate didn't wait for anyone to reply. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of spiritual lights shot out and appeared in front of all the cultivators present. Luo Fan raised his hand to receive the spiritual lights, and a lot of information flowed into his mind. The information this time was 10,000 times more than the previous ones. It was all about the mysteries of the array formation, how to cultivate the array formation, and how to truly set it up. However, even though the content was 10,000 times more than before, the explanation was as detailed as possible. However, the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sages were still the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sages, and the principles of level 9 pseudo-sages were still the principles of level 9 pseudo-sages. Compared to before, Luo Fan had only uncovered a small part of the mysteries of the array formation. He had only uncovered a small part of the mysteries of the formation, letting him know how to arrange it. What Luo Fan really wanted to understand and see clearly was still shrouded in a fog, and he still didn't know how to deal with it. "Ha! So you people are the food that the witch brought." At this moment, a loud voice suddenly came from between heaven and earth. Then, the fog in the sky began to surge. It formed a life form that was very similar to the form of Luo Fan's pet. Mystic Yang Sky. Luo Fan was shocked when he saw this life form. This appearance was clearly the appearance of a connate Tao body of the mystic Yang Sky. A life form that looked like this had either failed to take human form or was a life form of the mystic Yang Sky. It was obvious, given how powerful this life form was and how it dared to call the Yuan Venerate a demonic woman. It was obvious that it couldn't have failed to take human form. It could only be a life form of the mystic yang sky. It really has something to do with the mystic yang sky. Luo Fan became even more vigilant. This vigilance wasn't only for the sky in front of him, but also for the Yuan Venerate. You actually dare to appear in front of me, the Yuan Venerate said calmly. Ha ha ha. Why wouldn't I dare to appear in front of you? I wasn't the one who escaped in a sorry state the last time. It was you. The huge body formed by the fog laughed. This time, I brought these people here to gather the power of everyone to destroy the sky and wipe out all the remnants of the demon world. This is not only to avenge me, but also to clean up the malignant tumor of the entire sky, the Yuan Venerate said faintly. Gather the power of everyone. How are you going to gather it? Are you going to devour everyone or use everyone as cannon fodder? The person laughed. The expressions of everyone on the platform changed slightly when they heard this. In fact, everyone present had the same concern. Although they had a righteous cause and wanted to eradicate the malignant tumor of this sky and the remnants of the demon world, this didn't mean that all of them were willing to sacrifice themselves for others. However, it did not mean that every one of them had the thought of sacrificing themselves for others. It did not mean that they were willing to be cannon fodder and be devoured by others. Before participating in this matter, they had already been secretly worried that the Yuan Venerate would do as the figure in front of them had said. It was also because of this that they had been reluctant to practice the array formation technique that the Yuan Venerate had imparted to them. At this moment, the figure's words directly exposed the worries in their hearts. In an instant, they could no longer pretend that they didn't know anything. The Yuan Venerate naturally knew what the people behind him were thinking. His expression changed slightly. I didn't expect the remnants of the demon world to have such a sharp tongue. How could they use such a despicable method to sow discord? I am sowing discord. However, if you trust each other, how could I sow discord? The figure laughed heartily. The Yuan Venerate snorted coldly and raised his hand. In an instant, a terrifying force acted on the figure out of thin air, causing it to collapse and turn into fog. At that moment, the figure only laughed out loud. He didn't suffer any damage or show any signs of pain. The palm strike of the Yuan Venerate didn't just destroy the figure. It also impacted the sky and earth. In an instant, the sky and earth caved in, and a powerful shock wave swept out in all directions from the spot where the palm strike had struck. Compared to the ripples on the surface of a calm lake caused by fallen leaves, the palm strike of the Yuan Venerate had directly set off a tsunami. At the same time, everyone could clearly see that the spot where the Yuan Venerate had struck was regenerating layers and layers of inscriptions. Through continuous contact, he finally made up for that location, allowing it to return to its original appearance. In the blink of an eye, everything had completely calmed down. At the same time, the figure once again condensed from the fog and appeared in the sky. He laughed heartily at the Yuan Venerate and said, "Did someone expose your scheme and make you angry? Is that why you attacked?" As he said that, he turned to the crowd of cultivators and said, "Have you all seen the true face of this demonic woman now? How could she be so flustered and exasperated if she hadn't been exposed? How could she disregard her status and stop me from speaking?" "So this is your motive," the Yuan Venerate suddenly said. "What motive?" The figure frowned. He asked doubtfully, "It seems like the injuries you suffered previously haven't healed at all. The fact that I brought them here has indeed put a lot of pressure on you." The Yuan Venerate smiled. She had the appearance of a beautiful woman to begin with, so this smile that came from the bottom of her heart made her even more charming. She really had the foundation to make people completely obsessed with her. Fortunately, none of the people present were ordinary mortals. Their Tao hearts were extremely firm, and no one lost their composure because of this. On the contrary, the expression of the figure condensed from the fog changed slightly. Although he quickly recovered, it didn't escape the eyes of all the cultivators present. "You will know how my injuries are once you try." He smiled. "However, you might not necessarily be the same. Could it be that you guys can still work together now? Can you still pull out the thorn that I planted in your hearts?" Internal strife. Internal strife. As he laughed, his figure gradually dissipated. It turned back into the fog and gradually revealed the layers of formations around the world. As he disappeared, the platform fell into silence. Or rather, silence. I originally intended to let everyone follow me to attack that realm, but it seems that it's impossible now. The Yuan Venerate sighed, said. However, she knew very well that no matter what intentions the remnant of the demon realm had, what he had said was correct. It was impossible for them to trust each other unconditionally. Those cultivators who were not as skilled as her would not believe her completely. Previously, they might have been able to put aside the danger of being used as cannon fodder and being devoured and refined for the sake of righteousness. But now that that person had exposed these problems, they can no longer continue to be like that. Forgive me, Senior, although we are willing to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. However, if we fall into a trap, we won't be willing to accept it no matter what, an 8th-tier false sage said. Fine, fine. In that case, I will explain all the contents of the array formation in detail to all of you. If this step was skipped, we would have been able to set up the great array formation and break the barrier of this realm in a few days. If I were to explain it in detail, I'm afraid it would have taken hundreds of years to set up the array formation. Unfortunately, the remnant of the demon realm has been given 100 years to prepare. I wonder what methods he will use to resist the attack. The Yuan Venerate sighed. The eyes of the cultivators present lit up when they heard this. In the Yuan Venerate's opinion, this was a waste of time. This would give the remnant of the demon realm 100 years to prepare and make the real attack on this realm more troublesome and complicated. However, in their opinion, this was a great opportunity. It had to be known that the Yuan Venerate was a true 9th-tier false sage. For such an existence to explain the profound mysteries of the 9th-level pseudo-saint to them in detail, it was like a 9th-level pseudo-saint explaining the principles of the 9th-level pseudo-saint to them. What kind of great opportunity was that? Immediately, everyone expressed their shame and thanked the Yuan Venerate for his leniency. The Yuan Venerate was a decisive person. Since he had already made up his mind, he naturally wouldn't delay any longer. He immediately set up another platform and began to explain the various aspects of the array formation in detail to everyone. Because it was a public lecture, it was naturally impossible to separate the lecture into segments. Therefore, the Yuan Venerate's lecture revealed all the mysteries of the array formation. Only now did everyone know what the formation looked like as a whole. Only then did they know how complicated and mysterious the formation was. For a moment, everyone was immersed in the Yuan Venerate's lecture. While the Yuan Venerate was explaining the many mysteries of the array formation to everyone, a conversation took place somewhere in the sky. Sir Venerate, are we just going to let them continue like this? This way, all of them will have a better understanding of the array formation, and their cooperation will be more tacit. When that time comes, we will be in even more danger. Chapter 1369. 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Soon, the Yuan Venerate finished preaching the mysteries of the entire array formation on the platform in front of the sky. In general, everyone understood why each point of the array formation was arranged in such a way, what mysteries were contained within, and what effect it had on the entire array formation as a whole. Preaching in this manner for 100 years was naturally a great harvest for everyone. This was especially so for the level 8 pseudo-saints. They were only one level away from level 9 pseudo-saints, so they had a better understanding of the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-saints than other cultivators. This preaching was like pulling something that they could vaguely see through a telescope and allowing them to clearly observe and feel it. Although it was only a short period of 100 years, the level 8 pseudo-saints had undergone tremendous changes. Many of them exuded a faint aura of level 9 pseudo-saints, as if they were gradually approaching the 9th step. Of course, this was just a trend. In just a short period of 100 years, even if level 9 pseudo-saints preached the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-saints, they still wouldn't be able to reach the 9th step. If it was so easy to reach level 9 pseudo-saints, how could there still be level 8 pseudo-saints in the true Spirit Water Palace? they would have all reached the 9th step and become level 9 pseudo-saints. Among everyone, Luo Fan had also made considerable progress in the past 100 years. Through listening to the Yuan Venerate preaching the mysteries of the array formation, he unknowingly recalled the information that the level 9 pseudo-saint level wisdom that the Divine Venerate had bestowed upon him in the Source World. This information, it contained endless mysteries of level 9 pseudo-saints, and many of them were even more profound, complex, and mysterious than the mysteries contained in the array formation. The wisdom of cultivation was an extremely inconceivable existence. When it was attached to Luo Fan, it naturally gave him the way of thinking of a level 9 pseudo-saint and allowed him to instinctively understand the various principles that were originally understood by level 9 pseudo-saints. Once this wisdom left, he would completely lose this ability, and he might even forget everything that was contained within this cultivation wisdom. However, this was the mechanism of the cultivation wisdom itself. It wasn't Luo Fan's. Even if the cultivation wisdom was born with a mechanism to make the person who was loaded with this wisdom not remember any information contained in this wisdom after leaving, for Luo Fan, it was impossible to completely erase all his memories, and it was impossible to completely eliminate all the information. This was something that couldn't be done even in the primal chaos state. Therefore, although it seemed that all the information contained in the level 9 pseudo-sage wisdom had completely disappeared with the disappearance of the wisdom, the traces left in Luo Fan's memory and soul still existed. However, he couldn't understand or imagine the logic behind the information, so it didn't make a difference whether these traces were there or not. He understood a lot of the traces left in his memories by the cultivation wisdom of the level 9 pseudo-saint level and understood them. He also understood a lot of the traces left in the memories of the knowledge of the level 9 pseudo-saint of. This kind of profundity pushed his cultivation realm to make great progress. At this moment, although he was still not close to the peak level for pseudo-martial sage, he was several times stronger than before. He felt that he could vaguely see the existence of the 5th step. However, he had only spent a short 100 years here. It had to be said that having someone to guide him and not having anyone to guide him were two extremes. After the Yuan Venerate finished explaining the mysteries of the array formation, he said to everyone, "I have already explained the mysteries of this array formation clearly. Does anyone still have any doubts?" After explaining the mysteries of the array formation, the Yuan Venerate said to everyone, "I have already explained the mysteries of this array formation clearly. Does anyone still have any doubts?" The previous lecture. This was a great opportunity for everyone. However, it was an extremely intolerable annoyance for her. This was like a university professor explaining the theory of relativity, matrix mechanics, and wave dynamics from the perspective of a first grader. The feeling of lowering one's IQ was really irritating. She was already extremely irritated after experiencing such 100 years. "Thank you, Senior Yuan Venerate. We no longer have any doubts." Everyone naturally knew what to do after getting the benefit, so they naturally stood up and thanked the Yuan Venerate in unison. "Since there are no more doubts, let's start setting up the array formation." The Yuan Venerate heaved a sigh of relief. As she said that, she raised her hand and waved it gently. The layer of barrier that had been set up on this platform for the past 100 years, which completely isolated the space inside and outside, gradually dissipated. How could she completely ignore the profound mysteries of the array formation and allow the living beings in the sky and earth to listen? Although they might not be able to use it even if they heard it, what if? What if they could adjust the array formation according to the content of her lecture and make her various targeted methods useless? Therefore, in the past 100 years, the Yuan Venerate had used a lot of energy to seal off this platform, so that all sounds on this platform could not be heard by the outside world, and any information here could not be received by the living beings in the sky and earth. Although they had already understood the mysteries of this formation, they were still unable to comprehend it. However, it was still not an easy task to set up this formation again. By the time all the runes and worlds needed to set up the array formation were completely refined, another month had passed. During this month, Everyone wholeheartedly integrated the insights they had gained in the past 100 years into their work. The entire platform shone brightly and all sorts of mysterious lights that would make any cultivator feel enlightened flooded the entire platform, making it seem like a mystical world of light. Luo Fan was not like the other cultivators. He was wholeheartedly setting up the array formation that the Yuan Venerate had arranged for him. Of course, he wasn't cutting corners. He would really be courting death if he dared to do so in front of the Yuan Venerate. What he was doing was using the power of a level 9 pseudo-saint grade divine court sky cauldron that he had refined in the past to refine the worlds needed to set up the array formation. Those runes, those lines. He had directly used the divine court sky cauldron as a substitute and let the divine court sky cauldron bear everything that might happen for him. In other words, even though the Yuan Venerate had explained the mysteries of the array formation very clearly in the past 100 years, he still didn't trust the Yuan Venerate. He was still worried that the Yuan Venerate might have done something to the array formation. If he used his own power to help the array formation take shape, he might be schemed against by the Yuan Venerate. This wasn't impossible. If the Yuan Venerate had schemed against him, no matter how clearly he explained the mysteries of the array formation, no matter how normal it looked, no one could guarantee anything. He believed that he wasn't the only one who had this kind of understanding. He definitely wasn't the only one who had this kind of backup plan. Perhaps Yang Shizi and the others beside him had their own plans and didn't follow the Yuan Venerate's instructions honestly. They might have used some sort of substitute to ensure their own safety. However, this was also a tacit understanding. Even if the Yuan Venerate knew, there was nothing he could say. Very soon, when the last cultivator finished refining the array formation, the Yuan Venerate said, "Everyone, please proceed according to the rules." As she spoke, she raised her hand and gestured. The many worlds, runes, and lines in front of everyone flew up and condensed into an incomparably huge spherical array formation outside the platform. It flew at an extremely fast speed toward the realm created by the mysterious Yang realm cultivator. During this process, the Yuan Venerate kept raising her hand and emitting mysterious rays of light. The power contained in the array formation, the worlds, the runes, and the lines seemed to come to life as they started to circulate and fuse quickly. Countless rays of green light gradually emerged from the spherical formation, gradually dispersing the fog that covered everything in the surroundings, revealing the true appearance of the world that was originally hidden in the fog. From the surface of the realm, it looked like a black tortoise. It had the head of a dragon, the body of a turtle, and the tail of a snake. It was floating quietly in the absolute void. The fog that had originally shrouded the surroundings had already been pushed aside to form a huge spherical area that could accommodate the huge array formation and the huge realm. The black tortoise's eyes were originally closed. When it was illuminated by this light, it suddenly opened its eyes and stretched out its originally curled-up limbs. The countless lines on the surface of its body also started to shine and flow rapidly. It looked as if it had suddenly woken up from a dream. After the black tortoise woke up, it raised its head and let out a roar. The roar was so terrifying that it created billions of tiny worlds in the void. They were like bubbles that kept gushing out from its mouth and rushing toward the formation formed by the cultivators. "Break!" the Yuan Venerate shouted softly. The huge array formation shook slightly, and the countless bubbles burst with a loud bang. At the same time, Luo Fan felt the power within his divine Hall Sky cauldron being frantically extracted. This frantic extraction even caused the divine Hall Sky cauldron to shake slightly. It seemed as if it had been extracted too much and couldn't bear it anymore. Luo Fan couldn't help but be taken aback when he saw this. Fortunately, this extraction was happening on the divine Hall Sky cauldron. If it had happened on his own body, he wouldn't have been left with much power, even if he hadn't been sucked dry. Damn it! A series of curses rang out at this moment. All sorts of intense energy fluctuations appeared out of nowhere in the surroundings. Cracking sounds could be heard coming from many people's bodies. as if something in their bodies had been broken. The people whose things had been broken had ugly expressions on their faces. One could vaguely see pain and anger on their faces. As for the people whose things hadn't been broken, their expressions didn't change much, as if they hadn't suffered much. Upon seeing this, Luo Fan immediately understood. This was probably a method that the Yuan Venerate had used deliberately. The cultivators whose bodies had been broken had definitely used some sort of method to replace themselves and endure any possible abnormalities. It must be a cultivator who used some means to take on any possible abnormalities in his place. The people who hadn't experienced any changes had either obediently followed the instructions of the Yuan Venerate, or had used something as advanced as the divine Hall Sky Cauldron to replace their bodies to withstand the terrifying extraction of power. The people who had used something to replace their bodies were in a sorry state. The people who had followed the instructions had suffered greater losses. Simply put, this was clearly a warning from the Yuan Venerate. The few people beside Luo Fan were also among those who had a special shattering sound coming from their bodies. From this, it could be seen that Luo Fan's vision was pretty good. The people he found were all similar to him. The expressions of Yang Shizi and the others changed slightly. In the end, they suppressed the anger and pain in their hearts and regained their composure. At the same time, the huge spherical array formation had already merged with the huge black tortoise and enveloped the entire sky and land. The huge black tortoise began to struggle frantically after being enveloped by the array formation. The light of the array formation enveloping its body flickered as all sorts of extremely powerful attacks erupted from the array formation and struck the array formation outside, causing ripples to form on the outside and causing the array formation to bulge from time to time. It looked as if it couldn't withstand it and was about to collapse. Every time the black tortoise struggled, the expressions of the many cultivators on the platform would change drastically. This was because every time the black tortoise struggled, the array formation would begin to extract the power within their bodies and squeeze them like a juicer. All the power within the bodies of these cultivators was sucked dry, if not for the fact that many of the cultivators present were at the pseudo-saint grade and could instantly regenerate the power within their bodies. They would have been able to quickly replenish the power within their bodies. Perhaps by now, many cultivators had already been sucked dry and turned into nothingness. Of course, this was nothing for Luo Fan. At this moment, the extraction of power was no longer as great as it was at the beginning. It was maintained at the limit that a level 4 pseudo-saint grade cultivator could withstand. Or rather, it was at the limit that his physical body could withstand. If he was the one being extracted at this speed, he would naturally be in so much pain that he would rather die. However, it did not even cause any ripples on the Divine Court Heaven Cauldron. The Divine Court Heaven Cauldron was able to withstand the extraction of power extremely easily. Trying to destroy the array? In your dreams. At this moment, a loud roar came from the sky and land. Following this roar, a huge round hammer was spat out of the black tortoise's mouth. It expanded rapidly from its original diameter of a few feet to a terrifying size of billions of miles in the blink of an eye. It then smashed towards the array formed by the many cultivators. Seeing this, the expressions of the many cultivators on the platform changed drastically. They were all knowledgeable people, so they could tell at a glance that the round hammer was an extremely powerful level 9 pseudo-saint grade treasure. The power of such a treasure might not be comparable to the massive array that protected the entire sky and land. However, due to its ability to destroy, the destructive power of the array formation would only be stronger than the impact of the array formation. It cannot be any weaker. Naturally, they would not be so excited just because of the safety of the array formation. The reason they were so excited was because the array formation's resistance had already caused them so much damage. How would the array formation absorb their power now that an even stronger destructive force was being exerted on it? Would they be able to withstand an even more intense and terrifying absorption force? You finally made your move. Let me see how much you have recovered in the past 100 years. the Yuan Venerate said indifferently. As she spoke, she raised her hand and pressed it against the void. In an instant, the spherical array formation frantically absorbed the power of the many cultivators. In an instant, more than half of the cultivators were exhausted and fell to the ground. After the formation absorbed the energy, it transformed into a huge palm that suddenly blocked in front of the huge round hammer. With a sudden squeeze, the round hammer was grasped in the palm of its hand. With this clench, a terrifying impact spread, and the huge array formation instantly changed from its original spherical shape to the shape of a huge watermelon. It even changed into the shape of a cucumber. Following this change, the remaining cultivators on the platform, who had not yet fallen to the ground, finally fell to the ground. Although Luo Fan had used the level 9 pseudo-saint grade Divine Sky Cauldron as a substitute to provide power for him, he also decisively cut off the Divine Sky Cauldron supply of power to the array formation and fell to the ground as well. Ha ha ha! You've revealed your tale. You still dare to say that you aren't using them as cannon fodder? A loud laughter echoed. Chapter 1370. Prepare to die. The Yuan Venerate didn't reply to the voice. Instead, he shouted softly. The array formation that had absorbed the power of so many cultivators trembled slightly, and a terrifying power struck the round hammer. The round hammer was repelled by this strike and crashed into the black tortoise, causing the array formation to tremble violently. Following this tremor, the power of the array formation suddenly condensed and divided into 96 million spots that were inserted deep into the array formation. The 96 million strands of power that were inserted deep into the array formation were like 96 million steel needles piercing deep into the body of the black tortoise, completely sealing its body. In an instant, the black tortoise suffered unimaginable pain. The array formation on the surface of the black tortoise was unable to withstand the impact of this condensed power and erupted with an earth-shattering radiance. All the lines flowed frantically, trying to condense into some sort of terrifying form that could erupt with power to counter the array formation. However, because of the effect of the 96 million strands of power, the lines were fixed in a certain area by that power no matter how much they struggled. Although they were extremely powerful in certain areas, they simply couldn't link together, and the greatest power of the array formation couldn't be fully unleashed. Under such circumstances, the black tortoise, like heaven and earth, was like a tortoise that had lost its thick shell, revealing its extremely fragile body. The Yuan Venerate smiled faintly and took a step forward in a relaxed manner. He crashed into the array formation and easily penetrated it, entering the black tortoise. The moment he entered the black tortoise began to struggle violently. Roars kept coming out of the black tortoise's mouth and turned into bubble worlds that spread in all directions. However, when these bubble worlds collided with the array formation that enveloped the huge black tortoise, they burst like ordinary bubbles that had crashed into a wall. Although a loud noise was produced, but it couldn't cause any real consequences. Damn it. The cultivators on the platform cursed angrily after the Yuan Venerate disappeared into the black tortoise. I didn't expect to be schemed against. It's not exactly schemed against. Even though we've been drained quite a bit of our strength by the formation, we're still able to withstand it. However, Senior Yuan Venerate had already said so back then. He wants us to set up an array formation to break through the array formation defenses of this realm. However, this still falls within the scope of what Senior Yuan Venerate mentioned, another cultivator said. Humph. Back then, he didn't say that we were the only source of energy for this formation. Now that we become like this, aren't we just meat on the chopping block? The cultivator who started cursing said angrily. He seemed to be very unhappy with the retarded appearance of the cultivator who refuted his words. What's the point of talking nonsense like this? The most important thing for us now is to think of a way to get out of this state. Another cultivator said, Fellow Taoist, EXIN, you are a disciple of the true Spirit Water Palace. Do you know what other changes will happen to the formation? At that moment, A cultivator suddenly asked the female level 8 pseudo-sage beside the Yuan Venerate, who had not spoken since the beginning. She was also Qin Yin's master. How could we possibly guess the palace master's plan? You're asking the wrong person, Exin said. I almost forgot that there are also disciples of the true Spirit Water Palace here. I don't think Senior Yuan Venerate will go overboard by letting these disciples fall into the same fate as us, a cultivator said. Exin did not speak. Instead, she had a mocking look on her face, as if she was mocking the person who had spoken. She also seemed to be mocking herself and the Yuan Venerate. At that moment, everyone's expression suddenly changed. They could sense that the suction force transmitted from the array formation had suddenly increased by many times. Not only was it absorbing the power that they had recovered a little, but it also started to crazily overdraft their life force. The life force contained in their bodies, consciousness, and life source was converted into power and absorbed. This sort of absorption had almost exceeded the limit. In just an instant, the absorption was already comparable to the sum of all the power in thousands of realms. Although many of the cultivators present were pseudo-sage cultivators with extremely high levels of power and might, how could the power itself compare to that of a real realm? Almost all the cultivators seemed to have aged by hundreds of millions of years after being sucked in like this. An inexplicable aura of decay gradually permeated the platform. Among them, many cultivators even fell into a dormant state because the consumption was too great. Their perception of the outside world had completely disappeared. Such a change had completely eliminated all the arguments that had been going on before. At that moment, everyone no longer had any doubts. This Yuan Venerate was really sinister. As expected, they were being treated as cannon fodder as well as resources. I never thought that after cultivating hard for hundreds of millions of years, we would actually die in such a tragic way. I really can't accept this. A cultivator said in an old voice. It's not considered tragic. After all, dying at the hands of a level 9 pseudo-sage is already something to be proud of, another cultivator said in an even older voice. Taoist Ixen, it seems like you have made a huge mistake and were brought here to participate in this matter. A level 8 pseudo-sage told Ixen. They couldn't even struggle now, as any bit of power they recovered would be taken away by the array formation. Even their life force was continuously being depleted. There was simply no possibility of them resisting, and they would only fall into a bottomless abyss. Under the circumstances, they could only focus on the only possible breakthrough point, the members of the Spirit Water True Palace. It's useless. I'm just a sacrifice. I'm just a supplement arranged by the Palace Master because he saw that there wasn't enough power. I'm no different from all of you. I'm the same as all of you. Therefore, you don't have to waste your efforts on me, Exin said faintly. Although everyone was disappointed, they still held on to the slightest bit of hope and started to talk to Exin. They were either asking, persuading, threatening, or tempting Exin. It was really noisier than a market. Apart from Exin, the other disciples of the Spirit Water True Palace were also being bombarded. Everyone wanted to find out from them how they could escape this miserable fate. Luo Fan didn't participate in the various efforts of these cultivators at all. Although he had fallen to the ground like everyone else, it wasn't because too much power had been absorbed. He had collapsed to the ground because his life force had been consumed. Instead, he had done this to hide his differences. He had deliberately collapsed to the ground. Although everyone had their own defensive methods to prevent themselves from being plotted against by Yuan Venerate and to escape the control of a Yuan Venerate as much as possible. However, no matter how many methods they had and how strong they were, how could they compare to Luo Fan, who actually had a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure that could be used as a substitute? Everyone's backup plans had been completely disintegrated and destroyed by the Yuan Venerate. However, Luo Fan's Divine Sky Cauldron was extremely stable. No matter what methods the Yuan Venerate used, it would always remain there and completely isolate the techniques of the Yuan Venerate from Luo Fan's body. Even though the array formation was frantically absorbing terrifying power, it didn't cause him any harm. Even the divine sky cauldron didn't have much of an impact. The kind of power that ordinary cultivators would have to use their life force to make up for when their power was exhausted was nothing to the divine sky cauldron. It didn't even cause the power of the divine sky cauldron to fluctuate. However, even though he hadn't suffered any losses, Luo Fan didn't completely relax. On the contrary, he was even more nervous and concerned about how things would develop than everyone else on this platform. Just now, everyone had only felt that the array formation was frantically absorbing their power. However, Luo Fan had seen more. He knew very well that at this very moment, inside the formation, in that world, there was an extremely intense battle going on. It was a terrifying battle between level 9 pseudo-sages. After all, this was just a realm. Although there were countless life forms and cultivators in this realm, it was just a realm. Although there seemed to be a lot of resources, it was really limited when compared to the growth of a cultivator. Therefore, only a level 9 pseudo-sage had appeared. Furthermore, because this level 9 pseudo-sage had absorbed too much resources from this realm, the strongest person in this realm, besides this level 9 pseudo-sage, was actually a level 4 pseudo-sage. Obviously, a level 9 pseudo-saint grade Yuan Venerate would be able to destroy such a world by herself, especially now, when she still had the help of the array formation's power. Luo Fan's eyes were connected to the array formation and directly saw the scene within the array formation. He saw that the Yuan Venerate was currently sealed within a terrifying array formation that was led by a level 9 pseudo-sage and used the countless life forms of this realm as its foundation. A faint layer of mist was currently lingering around the Yuan Venerate's body, transforming into countless incredible treasures that were in a stalemate with the array formation. On the other hand, she was constantly breaking the array formation and fighting with the leader of the array formation from another direction. In other words, the Yuan Venerate didn't just regard the array formation set up by Luo Fan and the others as the power to break the defensive array formation of this realm. She also regarded it as a stalemate with all the life forms in this realm. The consumption of energy to fight against an array formation set up by a level 9 pseudo-sage was obvious. At almost every moment, the array formation consumed energy that was enough to completely destroy tens of thousands of realms. This was why the array formation actually needed to absorb the life force of hundreds of pseudo-sage powerhouses to replenish its energy. This method of borrowing chickens to lay eggs is really smooth. Luo Fan couldn't help but admire the Yuan Venerate's proficiency in this method as he watched the scene unfold. The battle taking place in the middle of the two array formations contained endless mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sage. Every little change was extremely profound. Even though Luo Fan was a part of one of the formations, he was unable to grasp its mysteries. He could only feel that every change in the formation had unimaginable consequences. At every moment, there were methods that exceeded his expectations being displayed, and when they came into contact with the opponent's methods that he could not imagine, they would destroy each other. During this process, the tortoise-shaped realm was destroyed again and again. The entire realm was destroyed millions of times by the aftermath of this terrifying battle. The entire world seemed to be destroyed and reborn millions of times at every moment because of the aftermath of this terrifying battle. If it weren't for the fact that all the living beings in that realm were included in the protective range of the array formation, all the living beings in that realm would have been annihilated. Apart from the level 9 pseudo-sage, there wouldn't be any survivors. This was also because the realm was destroyed and reborn so many times. Hence, at this very moment, from the outside, the realm seemed to have changed quite a bit. It was still in the form of the black tortoise. However, the black tortoise had become chaotic and its entire body had a deathly gray color. Its originally bright and clear eyes had also become turbid. His entire body only knew how to continuously roar and spew out one world bubble after another to strike the formation. It's obvious that the Yuan Venerate has the upper hand. The level 9 pseudo-sage has already been greatly exhausted, and the Yuan Venerate hasn't even used any of his power. Luo Fan frowned as he carefully analyzed the scene in the realm. Although he had been invited here by the Yuan Venerate to deal with the realm, now he hoped that the Yuan Venerate would fail. There was no other reason. If the Heaven and Earth won, Luo Fan could just leave and return to the demon realm. Then he would be safe. The level 9 demigod in the Heaven and Earth obviously wouldn't chase him into the demon realm to deal with him. If they dare to do so, why would he need to hide in this world? However, if the Yuan Venerate won, the situation would be different. If there were still cultivators alive and the Yuan Venerate was merciful enough, she would let them go to the demon realm to spread the news of how she had deliberately deceived them and used them as cannon fodder to devour their life force. This would tarnish her image and the image of the true Spirit Water Palace. However, it was obvious that this kind of mercy wasn't something an ordinary person could possess. Given the Yuan Venerate's current actions, even if she was merciful, she would still not be able to do this. Therefore, after the Yuan Venerate emerged victorious, the most likely outcome would be for the Yuan Venerate to wipe out all the cultivators present and completely obliterate everything that had happened. This would make it so that no one in the demon realm would know what had happened and allow her to maintain her mysterious and lofty image in the demon realm. Perhaps destroying the array formation isn't a bad choice. Luo Fan's eyes flashed as he thought to himself. Under such circumstances, destroying the array formation was definitely the easiest way to come up with such an idea. Given the capabilities of the Yuan Venerate, she had naturally taken precautions against this. She had already made preparations during the process of refining the array formation. This had caused everyone to completely lose control of the array formation. If Luo Fan had been one of those cultivators, this idea would naturally have been a pipe dream. However, Luo Fan clearly wasn't one of them. Others might not be able to do it, but he had the support of the divine court sky cauldron. The technique that the Yuan Venerate had left behind in the array formation was a level 9 pseudo-saint level technique. The divine court sky cauldron itself was a level 9 pseudo-saint level treasure. Completely replacing this technique and allowing him to completely control the array formation would naturally be beyond his capabilities. However, destroying this array formation wasn't a difficult task for the divine court sky cauldron. After figuring out a solution, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. In this place where everyone's complexion was deathly pale and their bodies were filled with the aura of decay, everyone looked as if they had just lost their parents. Yet, Luo Fan suddenly revealed smile. One could imagine how conspicuous this was. In an instant, almost all the cultivators turned to look at Luo Fan. Taoist Luo Fan, why are you smiling? Yang Shizi asked in a hoarse voice. Yang Shizi had already turned into an old woman. Her face was covered in layers of wrinkles like tree bark. They were so thick that they could even squash a mosquito to death. Where was her previous grace? I'm just smiling at Taoist Exine. Luo Fan chuckled. His voice hadn't changed much. It wasn't much different from before. He was smiling because he had found a way to resolve the predicament before him. However, he obviously couldn't say this now. Therefore, he could only use this as an excuse to dodge the question. Instead, he began to slowly channel the power of the divine court sky cauldron into the array formation. Taoist Luo Fan, why are you laughing at me? Exin asked curiously. I'm laughing at your tragic fate. You were originally a strong contender for the position of the next palace master, yet you ended up like this. You're going to be whipped to death. Luo Fan chuckled. A strong contender for the palace master? In an instant, almost all the cultivators understood something. They were all pseudo-saint level entities. How could any of them be stupid? Countless thoughts flashed through their minds in an instant as they more or less guessed the meaning behind this sentence. Exion's expression changed for a moment before she felt relieved. I didn't expect this kind of family scandal to be publicized to the whole world. Looks like it's the work of my muddle-headed disciple again. Exion sighed helplessly. Chapter 1371. Luo Fan just smiled and didn't say anything else. At the moment, he could already sense that the power of the divine court sky cauldron had already seeped into the various nodes of the array formation. As the power of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court seeped into it, the shape of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court appeared out of thin air on the oval surface of the formation. It grew larger and more distinct until it finally turned into a solid three-legged cauldron, completely enveloping the entire formation. Such a drastic change naturally attracted the attention of many cultivators on the platform. At the same time, it also attracted the attention of the Yuan Venerate in the sky. Many cultivators on the platform didn't know what was going on. Some of them even thought that it was the doing of the Yuan Venerate or some kind of change in the array formation itself. However, the Yuan Venerate knew very well that this was the power of some kind of level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Damn it, it actually hit itself so deeply. The Yuan Venerate's expression changed slightly as he raised his hand, and a wave of power shot out from where he was. It turned into a boundless sky and earth that quickly blasted towards the three-legged cauldron on the array formation. Looking at the exquisite degree of its power and the terrifying degree of its quantity, if Luo Fan were to personally face this move, he would certainly die, and the result would be the scattering of his soul. However, the one facing this move wasn't Luo Fan. Instead, it was the level 9 pseudo-sage Divine Court Sky Cauldron. In the face of this attack, the heavenly cauldron of the Divine Court merely shuddered slightly, and a terrifying power was generated. It gathered the entire formation and exploded with a loud bang. The entire Divine Court Sky Cauldron exploded. Along with the explosion of the Divine Court Sky Cauldron, the massive array formation that enveloped the sky and earth in the shape of the black tortoise also exploded. This array formation had been refined by many cultivators with great effort and was even completely connected to their life source. When it exploded, the impact of the explosion was directly transmitted to everyone's bodies through an extremely mysterious mechanism, causing their bodies to collapse in an instant. Almost everyone had completely lost their physical bodies due to the impact of such a terrifying power. Such an outcome, if it had been placed in the hands of a mortal, or even ordinary cultivators, that was the result of everyone being wiped out. However, in this situation where all the cultivators were at the pseudo-sage stage, the outcome would not be the same. For them, the loss of his physical body, it wasn't a loss at all. It was only for a moment. In the blink of an eye, the mist that had been blown away by the cultivators condensed back into the cultivators once more. Moreover, although their source of life was seriously injured, they were still able to withstand it. However, because the mechanism that constantly absorbed their power and plundered their life source had disappeared, they no longer looked as old as before when they regained their form. Instead, they had regained their original graceful bearing. Although they didn't know what had happened, everyone was overjoyed. They couldn't be bothered to find out what was going on. Everyone made a decision in an instant and turned around to rush towards the exit of the space-time tunnel. This tunnel had been opened by Yuan Venerate. However, in order to gain everyone's trust, the Yuan Venerate hadn't sealed the tunnel all these years and had left the entrance to the demon realm open behind everyone. Therefore, they didn't encounter any obstructions when they rushed out. In the blink of an eye, most of the hundreds of cultivators had disappeared from the platform, leaving only a few people behind. Among them were a few level 8 pseudo-sacred realm cultivators, as well as the Exian and the other cultivators from the Spirit Water True Palace. There were also a few reckless cultivators and Luo Fan. These people were either unwilling to leave after suffering such a huge loss, or they felt that things were already safe and wanted to see how things would turn out, or they were disciples of the Spiritual Water True Palace. Even if they left, they wouldn't be able to escape the control of a Yuan Venerate, so they decided not to leave. I didn't expect that Taoist Luo Fan would still dare to stay here. How audacious of you, the Exian said as she looked at Luo Fan with an inexplicable expression. Luo Fan's behavior had been so strange just now that any ordinary cultivator would be able to tell that he was the one who had done it. He had used some tricks to free everyone. It wasn't strange that the Exian was able to see through it. Why can't I stay here? Luo Fan chuckled. He didn't say anything else. Even though everyone could see that he was the culprit, no one could be completely sure that he was the culprit as long as he didn't admit it. In that case, it wouldn't be easy for anyone other than a Yuan Venerate to deal with him casually. Meanwhile, the Yuan Venerate, who was in the Black Tortoise realm, was no longer in the mood to care about what was happening outside. Because she had lost the power of the array formation, she could only personally deal with the array formation formed by all the life forms in the realm and personally resist the countless attacks condensed by the array formation. The level 9 pseudo-saint in the realm was very good at seizing opportunities. Although she didn't know who had made a move outside and broken the array formation, it was still a good thing for her. No matter what, the outcome of the array formation being broken was a good thing for her. Therefore, she didn't care about anything else. All she did was make use of the aftermath of the array formation being broken. Besides condensing the power of the life forms to attack the Yuan Venerate, she also completely activated the powerful array formation protecting the realm and completely sealed it from the outside. This prevented life forms from entering the realm and also prevented the life forms in the realm from leaving. This kind of choice and action was simply too difficult for Yuan Venerate to deal with. Thus, she was exhausted from running for her life and cut a sorry figure. Taoist Luo Fan, what do you think we should do next? A level 8 pseudo-saint named Yuan Liangzi asked Luo Fan with a smile. Although Luo Fan was only a level 4 pseudo-sage, compared to a level 8 pseudo-sage, in terms of cultivation realm, he was simply an ant-like existence to a level 8 pseudo-sage. As for Luo Fan's true combat strength, it was almost comparable to theirs. Naturally, this was not something they knew. However, Luo Fan was an existence that wielded a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure. With the power of a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure, such an existence could already hold their own against them. If they were not careful, they might even be suppressed and killed by Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, these level 8 pseudo-saints naturally had no choice but to treat Luo Fan as an equal existence that could threaten them. Luo Fan smiled faintly. I'm just a lowly level 4 pseudo-saint. Compared to all of you, I'm really not worth mentioning. I'll leave it to all of you to decide what to do. The level 8 pseudo-saint nodded in satisfaction. Although he had already admitted that Luo Fan was qualified to be treated as an equal, he did not think that he was qualified to do so. However, he did not think that Luo Fan was qualified to tell them what to do. If Luo Fan had really instructed them, without any scruples, just now, of course, he would be in a bad mood. It was very likely that he would fall out with them. Now, Luo Fan was being so tactful. Naturally, he was quite satisfied. Similar to the level 8 pseudo-saint, the expressions of the others also relaxed when they saw Luo Fan's reaction. They were all very satisfied. The level 8 pseudo-saint said a few more words, but Luo Fan could only say that he was not knowledgeable enough and was unwilling to speak. After saying a few more times, the level 8 pseudo-saint no longer stood on ceremony when he saw Luo Fan's reaction. If the Yuan Venerate comes out victorious, what awaits us will definitely be an unbearable fate. I believe all of you agree on this point. Everyone understood that this was the truth. Other than Exian and the others from the spiritual Water True Palace, everyone else nodded in agreement. Therefore, there's only one way for us now, and that is to make the Yuan Venerate fail. This is the only way we will be qualified to live, the level 8 pseudo-saint continued. Level 8 pseudo-saint entities recovered their strength extremely quickly. Although most of the life force contained in their life source had been extracted, their strength had already been completely restored. The powerful aura emanating from their bodies was getting more and more obvious. Of course, this was only their strength. The life force that they had lost couldn't be easily replenished. It was precisely because their strength had recovered that the level 8 pseudo-saint had the confidence to say these words. Although a level 8 pseudo-saint wasn't considered much compared to a level 9 pseudo-saint, they were still considered extremely powerful in the demon realm. Such a powerful status made them absolutely unable to tolerate not repaying the losses they had suffered. This was also one of the reasons they had stayed here. What should we do then? A daring level 7 pseudo-saint asked. The level 8 pseudo-saint looked at Luo Fan with his own eyes. Luo Fan immediately knew what he was thinking. He clearly wanted to use his level 9 pseudo-saint treasure to attack the Yuan Venerate. Luo Fan only smirked and said, "My treasure has already been damaged, so I no longer have the strength to use it." Everyone knew that this was a lie. However, these words had already revealed Luo Fan's thoughts. Under the circumstances, unless these cultivators had the ability to completely suppress Luo Fan, they could only take these words as the truth. I see. That's really a pity. If we had that treasure, we would have been able to easily make the Yuan Venerate suffer a loss and make him stay in that realm, Yuan Liangzi said disappointedly. Although he didn't try to persuade Luo Fan directly, the intention of his words was obvious. Luo Fan just smiled and said, "It's indeed a pity." At this moment, Yuan Liangzi furrowed his brows, evidently dissatisfied. At the same time, the level 7 pseudo-saint said angrily, "Taoist Luo Fan, are you still trying to stay out of this? Don't forget that the first person the Yuan Venerate will look for when he comes out is not us, but you. If you don't make a move, we will leave immediately and leave you here alone to bear the consequences." Luo Fan's face turned cold as he said, "I don't understand what this Taoist is talking about." Yuan Liangzi shouted when he saw that the level 7 pseudo-saint was about to speak again. "Shut up. We are all in the same boat now, so we should cooperate sincerely. Don't say such things." Luo Fan just smiled and looked at them. Did they really think that he was a fool? One of them was playing a bad cop while the other was playing the good cop. Were they trying to coax him into taking out the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure? This was a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure. It was no ordinary treasure. The reason he was able to obtain a relatively equal status with everyone here was because he had this treasure. If he took out this magic treasure, what else could he rely on? Then, these people might even make a move to snatch his treasure. It was precisely because of this that no matter what they said, Luo Fan would not take out his magic treasure. The two of them said the same thing again, but when they saw that Luo Fan didn't reveal any flaws, they finally knew that this wouldn't work and could only stop helplessly. Since Taoist Luo Fan has something that you can't say, then forget it. He had lost that treasure. Things might be a little troublesome. However, it's not impossible. I think it's a better choice for us to combine an array formation, Yuan Liangzi said. Combine an array formation? Fellow Taoist, are you joking? After what happened just now, do you still dare to combine an array formation with others? Luo Fan said with a smile. This array formation, everyone can create it together. The level 8 pseudo-saint was stunned. He said, "Let's forget about combining an array formation. There's no time to create an array formation now. Even if we create an array formation, I'm afraid no one will be willing to devote themselves to it because of the previous experience. When the time comes, we will restrict each other and affect the performance of our power. It won't help at all," another level 8 pseudo-saint said. When everyone heard that, they nodded to show that it was indeed the case. Yuan Liangzi chuckled and gave up on the suggestion. "Then what do you all plan to do? Why don't we ask that level 9 Venerate and see if there's any way to strengthen the Great Array formation?" A level 8 pseudo-saint suggested. This suggestion caused everyone's eyes to light up. By doing so, they could eliminate the possibility of the Yuan Venerate escaping the realm and leave a backdoor in this realm so that they could slightly control the array formation. This way, if they wanted to deal with this realm in the future, they would be able to obtain some benefits through these arrangements. It was really killing two birds with one stone. This was really the best method. After understanding this, everyone expressed their agreement. After unifying the array formation, Yuan Liangzi executed his mystic ability and sent his consciousness directly into the realm. The array formation absorbed it and transmitted it to the mind of the level 9 pseudo-saint controlling the array formation. After a short while, a voice came from the realm. You guys are dreaming. You want me to expose the weakness of the array formation to you? Dream on." Although everyone was a little disappointed upon hearing this, they were more relaxed. Since the level 9 pseudo-saint dared to say this, it meant that he had the upper hand in the realm and didn't need anyone's help. He was confident that he could wipe out a Yuan Venerate. You can contact us at any time if you need help. However, it's best to be quick. After all, it will take some time for us to prepare the materials, Yuan Lianzi said with a smile. After saying that, he sat down in a lotus position on the platform and quietly looked at the realm shrouded in fog. He quietly sensed the various inexplicable fluctuations that were happening in the realm at every moment. At this moment, although everyone's actions were different, their eyes were all focused on the world shrouded in mist. They were speculating about what was happening in the realm and guessing whether the Yuan Venerate had suffered a loss or gained an advantage. Taoist Exen, you're a disciple of the true Spirit Water Palace. Can you sense the state of the Yuan Venerate? The person who asked this question was Luo Fan. Although I can't sense it directly, I can still sense it slightly through the restriction she left on me. These words immediately attracted everyone's attention. The state of the Yuan Venerate concerned their lives, so how could they not be concerned? Restriction. Taoist Exin is a high-ranking member of the true Spirit Water Palace and is most likely to become a level 9 pseudo-saint. Why would a Yuan Venerate place a restriction on you? Luo Fan asked in shock. Have you forgotten that I was brought here because I made a mistake? How could she be at ease without a restriction? Exin chuckled. Luo Fan frowned. So that's how it is. In that case, how is the effect of this restriction? How will it affect you if the Yuan Venerate dies? Everyone was also very concerned about this question. After all, this was a key issue that concerned whether Exin could be trusted. If the Yuan Venerate died, Exin would die too. Exin wouldn't be able to watch the Yuan Venerate die, so she would naturally not be trusted and would become a hidden danger. Exin smiled and said, Don't worry, everyone. I'm a level 8 pseudo-saint after all. How could a restriction kill me instantly? If the palace master dies, I will be seriously injured or even on the brink of death. However, I will be able to break free from the restriction and gain freedom. Hearing these words, the crowd finally relaxed. This wasn't because they believed Exin easily, but because they understood that what Exin had said was correct. There were many level 8 pseudo-saints among them, so they naturally knew how many life-saving techniques a level 8 pseudo-saint cultivator might have. It was impossible to use a restriction to completely eliminate their life-saving techniques, even if it was a restriction set up by a level 9 pseudo-saint. I see. How is the Yuan Venerate situation now? The restriction she placed on me hasn't changed at all. Even if the situation is bad, it shouldn't be that bad. Hearing her words, many cultivators revealed disappointed expressions. It's a pity that if those fellow cultivators hadn't left, their strength would have increased greatly, and we would have more confidence. A level 7 pseudo-saint side. Chapter 1372. They waited like this for 3 years. During these 3 years, the mist in front of them was constantly trembling, and the array formation on the surface of the sky and earth was constantly operating, producing a strange power that seeped into the sky and earth. Obviously, the battle within the sky and earth hadn't stopped for a single moment during these 3 years. What was extremely rare was that a few level 7 pseudo-sages had actually entered the platform through the passage. They were the cultivators who had quickly left the platform back then. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that something was wrong. Finally, after some time, they mustered up the courage to come here and face the Yuan Venerates together with everyone else. The crowd naturally welcomed these cultivators. After some explanation, the cultivators who came later also understood what they had to do next. They all suppressed their thoughts and waited on the platform. They were also powerful pseudo-sages, so they were naturally very wise and knew what was the right choice to make. It seemed like there was no progress at all, and they could only wait for the 2 level 9 pseudo-sages to emerge victorious. However, in fact, they still had many opportunities. Even though the original level 9 pseudo-sage had rejected everyone's suggestion to strengthen the array formation, it didn't mean that he would forever reject them. If the situation went awry and the level 9 pseudo-sage felt that he couldn't deal with the Yuan Venerates, he He would have no choice but to agree to everyone's help for the sake of his own life and the lives of the entire realm, even though he knew that everyone had selfish motives. The fact that the level 9 pseudo-sage didn't need anyone's help was a little disappointing to everyone. They couldn't let their schemes remain in this realm so that they wouldn't be able to deal with this realm in the future. However, from another perspective, didn't this mean that the level 9 pseudo-sage had the absolute upper hand against the Yuan Venerates? Didn't this mean that their safety was guaranteed? Therefore, no matter what the situation was, it was actually acceptable to everyone. It was also because of this that everyone was able to stand guard so calmly at this moment. One day, EXIAN's expression suddenly changed. Something isn't right. The Yuan Venerate is relying on the restriction to extract my power. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. They immediately sensed that EXIAN's aura was weakening at an alarming rate. In the blink of an eye, it seemed like all her gains and efforts over the past 3 years had gone up in smoke. She even had all the power that had been extracted by the array formation back then. She even looked like she had when her life force had been extracted. She had also become extremely old in the blink of an eye. Not good. I'm afraid that level 9 pseudo-sage won't be able to last much longer. Yuan Liangzi roared out. The aura on his body exploded as he sent his will into the heaven and earth in a frenzy. Senior, the Yuan Venerate is gathering power. I'm afraid it will be too late if you don't accept our help. Once the will was sent in, the world in the shape of the black tortoise rippled, and the formation on it instantly began to circulate at an unbelievable speed. A terrifying power burst forth, and a will was sent out. After this will appeared, it condensed into a form on the platform and turned into a ray of light. There was an incomparably dense aura of a level 9 pseudo-saint. Clearly, it was sent out by the level 9 pseudo-saint. Seeing this spiritual light, everyone was a bit hesitant. Finally, Luo Fan said, wait for me. This spirit light came from a level 9 false divine being. Although that level 9 false divine being could use them now, it was essentially an enemy, not a friend. This light was emitted by a level 9 pseudo-sage. Although the level 9 pseudo-sage could use them now, he was still their enemy. It was because of this consideration that none of the cultivators present were willing to come into contact with this spiritual light. However, Luo Fan was obviously different. He had the Divine Sky Cauldron, a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. He might not have absolute confidence that the Divine Sky Cauldron would be able to withstand the power emitted by a level 9 pseudo-sage. However, it was just a flash of inspiration. He didn't think that there was any possibility of an accident happening. Everyone present knew about Luo Fan's background, but they also knew that the only person present who could not be affected by the possible schemes of the light was Luo Fan, who possessed a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Hence, after Luo Fan said those words, everyone's expression loosened up. Some of them even looked at Luo Fan with a gratified expression. Luo Fan naturally didn't care what they thought of him. After no one objected, he raised his hand and pointed at the light. The power of the Divine Sky Cauldron rushed out of his hand and guided the light into the Divine Sky Cauldron in an instant. As the light changed, the information within was completely revealed. Just when Luo Fan thought that he was being paranoid and that there was no abnormality in the spirit light, a huge illusory figure suddenly flashed through the endless information. This huge figure had the body of a human and the legs of a tortoise. It was the level 9 pseudo-sage that had appeared on the surface. After this figure appeared inside the Divine Sky Cauldron, it shook violently and burrowed into the depths of the Divine Sky Cauldron, as if it wanted to completely refine the Divine Sky Cauldron. Luo Fan's expression changed as he exclaimed softly, "Good fella, you really have a backup plan." As he said that, he raised his hand and slapped it forward. As the power of the Divine Sky Cauldron erupted, the illusory figure was pushed out and formed in the void. The expressions of the many cultivators changed drastically when they saw this scene. Yuan Liangzi even shouted coldly, "I didn't expect Senior to be so despicable. Seems like we made an unnecessary move. Since Senior wants to scheme against us, We will take our leave." The figure's expression changed before he laughed heartily. "We are enemies, not friends. Isn't it normal for me to scheme against you? Since you think that my scheme is wrong, I will apologize. Why leave so easily? There is no difference between the threat of a Yuan Venerate and yours. If a Yuan Venerate is spared, I might not be able to escape death, but you guys won't be much better off either. Why risk your lives for a moment of anger? Perhaps, but I think that since Senior has the intention to scheme against us, you should have the confidence to deal with a Yuan Venerate. Therefore, I think we are still very safe." Yuan Liangzi wasn't willing to relax. The figure smiled. "You guys think too highly of me. You've overestimated me. Otherwise, why would I need to scheme? I could just crush you guys with overwhelming power. Otherwise, why would I need to scheme? I could just crush you guys with overwhelming power." At this moment, in the sky and land, however, it produced a deafening thunderous sound. Amidst this thunderous sound, the sky and land that had been shrouded in mist suddenly dispersed, revealing an extremely realistic black tortoise. At this moment, the black tortoise was struggling even more frantically. It looked like an ordinary tortoise had been thrown into a pot of boiling oil. Then, the array formation in the sky and land started to shine crazily. An extremely powerful aura surged from above and enveloped the platform, making everyone on the platform feel an indescribable pressure. The level 8 pseudo-saints were fine, as they didn't have any special reactions. However, the others were all emotional. Anyone could tell with a glance that they were enduring a terrifying pressure. The changes in the array formation showed that the power of the array formation had been unleashed to its limit. At this moment, the expression of the figure in front of everyone also changed at this moment. After a while, he said, "We managed to block it in the end." No one paid attention to him. Instead, they turned to look at Exine, who didn't seem to have much to do with this matter. They saw that Exine had already turned into a bag of bones and was lying unconscious on the ground. She was sitting there in a lotus position, looking like a 1,000-year-old corpse. If it weren't for the fact that everyone's sensing ability was astonishing and they could sense a faint trace of vitality from her body, they might have thought that she was already dead. Luo Fan knew that he couldn't delay any longer. He extracted the information contained in the spiritual light that was emitted from the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and turned it into a dozen spiritual lights that were cast in front of everyone on the platform. No one hesitated. They took the spiritual lights and began to analyze the information within. The figure acted as if the argument with everyone had never happened. "Everyone, don't worry. In order to avoid suspicion, I have other plans. The method of strengthening the formation that I've taught you doesn't need to be connected to you at all, nor does it require you to imprint your names on it. You only need to open up a special world, condense special materials, refine them a little, and throw them into the formation." Everyone nodded. They were also studying the information. They naturally knew what the method to strengthen the array formation was recorded in the information. A level 7 pseudo-saint asked, "Taoist Yuan Liangzi, is this method trustworthy?" After fighting for a while, Yuan Liangzi could be considered to have some status here. Yuan Liangzi frowned for a long time before replying, "At least, I didn't discover any sinister intentions behind it." The figure in front of everyone laughed heartily. "That's natural. I'm sincere now. Why would I scheme against all of you?" Then, his expression changed slightly. The Yuan Venerate has been replenished with a lot of power. Not only has his strength returned to its peak, but it has also improved greatly. I can only maintain my balance for another 6 months due to her methods. If you can't improve the power of the array formation within 6 months, I will have no choice but to protect myself. When that time comes, it will be difficult for me to keep the Yuan Venerate in that realm, even if you increase the power of the array formation again. I'm sure everyone is clear about the situation. It's up to you to choose." As he said that, he seemed to have consumed a lot of power, and his figure gradually became more illusory. Everyone's expression changed slightly when they heard this. These words might or might not be true, but no one dared to gamble now. After all, their lives would be at stake if they lost. There are still some problems here that require guidance from the senior, a level 6 pseudo-sage said. Besides scheming against everyone and occupying the body of a powerful cultivator, the figure had also come here to help everyone strengthen the array formation as quickly as possible. He did not hesitate when he heard someone ask him. He analyzed the problem bit by bit and explained in detail the many difficulties and mysteries contained within. With this beginning, what followed next was very obvious. After spending 3 months, the figure finally solved all the problems and difficulties that everyone had encountered. At this moment, the figure seemed to have exhausted all of his strength. In the end, he left behind these words, "Everyone, please hurry up. I'm not afraid. I can't hold on for much longer." Then, it collapsed and turned into nothingness. Everyone was reluctant to part with the figure as they watched it disappear. Of course, this reluctance was not because they had developed any deep feelings for the figure. It was because the figure could explain some of the mysteries of a level 9 pseudo-sage to them if it existed. He could even solve the problems that they had encountered in their original cultivation. There were indeed cultivators who mixed their questions into the array formation and asked the figure, and they indeed received an answer. After Yuan Liangzi said, "Let's do it," everyone began to move. Power surged. One world after another, all sorts of incomparably precious materials were created. They were then embedded into the world in front of them using a special method. The materials were devoured by the formation on the surface of the world, causing the formation to strengthen at a rate visible to the naked eye. The light on the formation grew brighter and brighter, becoming more and more obvious. The world in the shape of a black tortoise also began to shake its head at this moment, as if it had eaten something delicious. The faint pain that had been there for a long time had gradually disappeared. It wasn't just the others. Even Luo Fan had used the Divine Sky Cauldron as a carrier and borrowed the power of the Divine Sky Cauldron to create those worlds, create those materials, leave the aura of the Divine Sky Cauldron on them, and then send those worlds and materials into the array formation on the surface of the world to be devoured by the array formation. Although the others didn't have a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure as a substitute, they obviously had other means to achieve the same effect. The feeling that the worlds they created and the materials they created gave Luo Fan was somewhat different from the feeling they gave Luo Fan. While everyone was in full swing and the power of the array formation on the surface of the world was getting stronger, Exen, who was sitting on the platform like a 1,000-year-old corpse, suddenly opened her eyes. There was an indescribable anger in her eyes as she said, "You actually betrayed the world." Luo Fan wasn't the only one who could tell that this wasn't Exen. Everyone else could tell in an instant. Yuan Liangzi even said, "You aren't Taoist, Exin. You are a Yuan Venerate." Exin ignored the question and slowly stood up. She said coldly, "What you're doing now will determine the tragic fate that awaits you. The sage is omniscient. It's impossible to hide the fact that you have betrayed the world and helped the remnants of the demon world. The sage will definitely settle the score one day. When that time comes, you won't even be able to die." Her voice was sinister, making the many cultivators on the platform feel as if they were immersed in a layer of ice that had been frozen for thousands of years. The coldness spread from the surface of their bodies to the depths of their hearts. Upon seeing that everyone was wavering, Luo Fan said indifferently, "The sage is omniscient. He naturally knows that we have no choice but to do this. I believe that the sage is wise and will not blame us for this." These words made everyone's eyes clear. Of course, they would not be fooled by Luo Fan's words and completely change their minds. However, Luo Fan's words reminded them of their current situation. Perhaps the sage would punish them for what they had done in the future, but that was a matter for the future. If it didn't do this now, what awaited them would be a tragic death. It was obvious which was more important. Everyone scoffed and ignored what the Yuan Venerate had to say. Yuan Liangzi and the others even stopped what they were doing and raised their palms to slap at Exin. At first, they hadn't cared about Exin. They had thought that Exin's power and life force had been sucked dry and that there wouldn't be any power left to harm them. However, Now that they had discovered that the Yuan Venerate could actually use her body to descend his will, how could they still feel proud of EXIN? Now, they decided to completely erase EXIN and get rid of all possible hidden dangers. EXIN, or rather, the Yuan Venerate, paled and shouted, "How dare you?" She suddenly raised her hands and slapped at Yuan Liangzi's palms. She didn't have much power in this slap, but she used her technique to borrow the residual power that had escaped from the creation of various materials and worlds around her. She opened up a vast world and drew out even more terrifying power from it. Then she continued to transform, open up a world, and continue to draw power. This cycle repeated countless times. Finally, in the blink of an eye, she had already obtained power comparable to a level 8 pseudo-sage and collided with Yuan Liangzi's palm. With a loud rumble, the terrifying power exploded. The powerful shock wave swept through the surroundings and actually created an incomparably chaotic world outside the platform. It took a while before the world calmed down and completely disappeared. She didn't have any power, but she had easily obtained such terrifying power through some techniques. This method left everyone dumbfounded. Chapter 1373. EXIN was already at the end of her tether. Even though the will of a Yuan Venerate was controlling everything, and even though her will possessed incredible mystic abilities that allowed her to easily plunder the boundless energy around her to create new worlds and universes, it was impossible for her to defy the heavens. She could still rely on her own methods to resist and even gain the upper hand against a level 8 pseudo-sage. However, she wasn't just facing a level 8 pseudo-sage. How could she withstand the attacks of more than a dozen powerful pseudo-sages pouring down on her? She didn't even have the time to react before she was torn to pieces by the numerous mystic abilities and turned into nothingness. All traces of her existence disappeared without a trace. You will regret this. After EXIN was torn to pieces by everyone's mystic abilities, a voice was heard from the nothingness. It was the voice of a Yuan Venerate. There was no longer much resentment or hatred in the voice, but there was an inexplicable coldness that made anyone who heard it feel a chill down their spine. Everyone had already made up their minds to keep the Yuan Venerate in this realm, so these chilling words naturally didn't leave much of a mark in their hearts. However, no one took these words to heart. They exchanged glances and sped up to create new worlds, creating all kinds of resources, and throwing them into the powerful array formation in front of them. This time, nothing unexpected happened. The power of the array formation kept increasing with everyone's efforts. Its power kept increasing, and the light it emitted became more and more dazzling. When the last person threw the last world into the array formation, a formless fluctuation was emitted from the array formation. Amidst this fluctuation, the void changed and countless strange worlds appeared in the surroundings, completely dispersing the inexplicable fog and constructing billions of worlds in the surrounding nothingness. Each of these constructed worlds was a vast thousand realm. Furthermore, all the billions of vast thousand realms were combined into a wonderful form. The power of all the worlds communicated with each other in an extremely mysterious way and flowed with each other, forming a vast array formation in the process. When this array formation appeared, a strange power was suddenly generated from the array formation. It directly affected the platform, affecting every cultivator on the platform. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. There really is a problem. Then, the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron shook slightly and instantly enveloped him. Then he didn't stay here any longer. His figure swayed. He drilled into the space-time tunnel behind the platform and quickly rushed towards the demon realm. The moment he entered the space-time tunnel, beside him, there were also several cultivators who rushed out with him. Amongst them was Yuan Liangzi. However, compared to his previous confidence, the current Yuan Liangzi was in an extremely sorry state. Although there wasn't much panic on his face, he seemed to be extremely anxious. Behind them, the platform was instantly swallowed by the enormous formation. Everything on the platform, including the platform itself, disappeared. After the force devoured the platform, it did not stop there. Instead, it moved along the platform and swallowed the depths of the space-time tunnel. It seemed to be chasing behind Luo Fan and the others like a monster with its bloody mouth wide open, trying its best to swallow all of them. After all, Luo Fan had the help of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. His speed was unimaginably fast, and he was the first to return to the demon realm through the space-time tunnel. Behind him, Yuan Liangzi was the fastest. He only appeared in front of him after a dozen breaths. Behind Yuan Liangzi were 2 level 8 pseudo-sages and 1 level 7 pseudo-sage. Apart from the 5 of them, the rest of the people who were originally on the platform would never be able to come back. Not long after they left, the space-time tunnel seemed to be erased by a powerful force and turned into nothingness, as if it had never existed. Yuan Liangzi suddenly laughed when he saw this. I didn't expect the backup plan to be so violent. It seems like we don't have to worry about the Yuan Venerates escaping. Luo Fan sighed. It's just a pity for all of you. Another level 8 pseudo-sage called Hong Scholar said indifferently. We clearly knew that the level 9 pseudo-sage had a plan, yet we couldn't guard against it. Who can we blame even if we die? Luo Fan did not dwell on this matter and said, I don't plan to care about this anymore. What do you all plan to do? The level 7 pseudo-sage called Liang Ji said, I don't plan to care either. We have already done everything we can. If the Yuan Venerate can still escape like this, then I can only consider myself unlucky. That makes sense. Even if we stay here and the Yuan Venerate escapes, we won't have any means to resist. We will just be sending ourselves to our deaths, the other pseudo-sage, Mao Detzi, said. Fellow Taoist Mao Detzi is mistaken. Right at this moment, a voice resounded in the ears of everyone present. Everyone's expression changed slightly when they heard this voice. They simply hadn't sensed anything unusual around them. Didn't this mean that they wouldn't have been able to escape if they had launched a sneak attack? At this moment, an aura appeared out of nowhere somewhere in the void. Everyone looked over and saw a level 8 pseudo-sage hovering in the void. This level 8 pseudo-sage was also one of the hundreds of pseudo-sage cultivators that had escaped back then. They had originally thought that he had left long ago. Unexpectedly, he was still here. Yuan Liangzi frowned. So it's Taoist Kongningzi. Even with Taoist Kongningzi, we don't have much of a chance of winning even if we encounter a Yuan Venerate. We naturally don't have much of a chance of winning if it's just me. However, what if there's another level 9 Venerate? Everyone's expression changed when they heard this. A Yuan Venerate was already enough to make them run for their lives. In order to prevent her from taking revenge, they had no choice but to put in a lot of effort and even cooperate with the remnants of the demon realm. Now, they actually heard that there was another level 9 pseudo-sage. How could they, who had just escaped the Yuan Venerate's attack, remain calm? If there was a level 9 Venerate, why would we need to wait here? Killing his way in would be more than enough to deal with the remnants of the demon realm or the Yuan Venerates. Taoist Kongningzi, you must be joking. As soon as Yuan Liangzi said this, a voice was heard. Haha, what you said makes sense. The moment this voice entered their ears, everyone's face turned pale in an instant. There was no other reason. This voice was completely different from what Kongningzi had said previously. Although Kongningzi's words had surprised them, that was because this voice had come too suddenly. It had come unexpectedly. However, this wasn't the case at all. This voice contained an indescribable, supreme charm. It contained an indescribable, supreme charm. Listening to this voice, they felt as though they were listening to a Yuan Venerate speak. Obviously, this was the voice of a level 9 pseudo-sage. Only such a voice could have such a supreme charm. Only a male voice could make them think of a Yuan Venerate's voice. All of a sudden, Luo Fan and the others understood. This was the real reason why they hadn't been able to detect Kongningzi's presence even though he had been nearby. This level 9 pseudo-sage was obviously helping Kongningzi hide. After the voice of the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator was heard, the space in front of everyone distorted slightly. Then, a huge cloud carrying a few hundred figures appeared in front of everyone. Luo Fan took a closer look and realized that all the pseudo-sages that had escaped from the platform and rushed into the space-time channel had all appeared here. Yuan Liangzi sighed and said to a young man standing at the front of the cloud, "No wonder they thought it through and came to help us. It wasn't because they thought it through, but because Senior Hao Zun saw that we were too weak and sent them to help us." The young man chuckled. "You're very smart. Not only did you guess my identity, but you also guessed the truth." Yuan Liangzi sighed. "I didn't expect this to be the case. I'd rather not have guessed the truth." Hao Zun didn't mind and said, "You guys have worked hard. You could just watch the show from now on. Now it's the others' turn." As he spoke, he suddenly turned to look at Luo Fan and said, "You're not bad. You actually had the opportunity to obtain a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure." Luo Fan was shocked, but he quickly suppressed his emotions and said, "It was just a coincidence." Hao Zun said with a hidden meaning, "A treasure obtained by coincidence wouldn't be so compatible with your aura." Just when Luo Fan thought he had noticed something, Hao Zun stopped talking and raised his hand gently. Everyone felt their bodies float uncontrollably and landed on a cloud that appeared out of nowhere. Then, Hao Zun raised his hand and slapped forward. In an instant, space-time channel distorted, and a space-time channel that was hundreds of meters wide appeared in front of everyone. Although the channel was huge, it wasn't long. At the very least, everyone could see the situation at the other end of the channel from the entrance. At the other end of the passageway was an extremely bizarre and monstrous scene. Within it, countless worlds formed a huge black tortoise, slowly moving about in the void, as if a real black tortoise was enjoying the feeling of leisure under the evening sun. This was what the formation would look like after it matured. It was also what the formation looked like after it devoured the many worlds and materials created by everyone, as well as the pseudo-sage cultivators. In the middle of the huge black tortoise's shell, where the heart was, there was a black tortoise that was 100 times smaller than the one outside. However, it was constantly expanding and contracting. It looked like it couldn't withstand the terrifying power within, but it also looked like its heart was beating. Hao Zun was delighted when he saw this. "It's actually grown to this stage. You guys have done a pretty good job." At this moment, Luo Fan and the rest felt an inexplicable pressure. This pressure didn't come from Hao Zun, but from a huge formation formed by the worlds at the end of the space-time channel. It was the huge black tortoise that used the worlds as its cells. It has grown so much. Will that level 9 pseudo-sage have the ambition to advance further after killing the Yuan Venerate? This worry suddenly appeared in everyone's hearts. Hao Zun muttered, "Nobody would dare say that I don't care about the bigger picture if I were to wipe out this world and the Yuan Venerate after growing to this stage." An inexplicable coldness gradually appeared in his eyes. He didn't deliberately hide this from the others, so almost all the pseudo-sage cultivators present heard him. In an instant, everyone came to a sudden realization. An inexplicable chill crept into their hearts. He actually has a feud with the Yuan Venerate. He was only obstructed by others under normal circumstances. She can't take revenge, but this time she deliberately put the Yuan Venerate in this state where she can't get out of it. Then she will deal with the trouble she has encountered. Luo Fan thought to himself as he felt a bone-chilling cold. At this moment, he suddenly recalled the situation when he had met the divine Venerate and his disciple. In an instant, another thought popped up in his mind. Yuan Venerate. Has she really been tricked by us to this extent? Or does she also have her own plans? All of this is just an act. As he thought about this, he couldn't help but shiver. It would be fine if it wasn't, but if it was true, he felt that he would avoid anything related to a level 9 pseudo-sage in the future. He wouldn't have the courage to accept any opportunities, no matter how wonderful they seemed. After all, if the Yuan Venerate had really created this situation on purpose, wouldn't it mean that she had invited them to do what they had done previously? Wouldn't that mean that all the actions and trump cards of Luo Fan and the others were already completely under the control of the Yuan Venerate? Hao Zun smiled and began to get everyone to set up the array. The pseudo-sage level cultivators all wore helpless looks on their faces. They had almost been drained to death because they had helped the Yuan Venerate set up the array. They had even left while the Yuan Venerate was fighting the remnants of the demon realm. They had never imagined that they would still have to set up the array under the control of a level 9 pseudo-sage after leaving the passageway. How could they not feel helpless? However, even though they had the courage to escape from the platform, it didn't mean that they had the courage to resist a level 9 Venerate. Hao Zun was watching from the side, so they had no choice but to set up the array according to his instructions, no matter how unwilling they were. They didn't even dare show their dissatisfaction. Luo Fan and the others had been tossing and turning on the platform for a long time over the years, and they had also been tossed and turned outside the passageway for a long time. Hao Zun had naturally imparted the method of setting up the array to them. However, compared to the Yuan Venerate, Hao Zun was much more generous. In addition to getting the cultivators to set up the array, he also took out hundreds of level 8 pseudo-sage treasures and placed them on the cultivators so that they could refine them. Luo Fan felt a chill down his spine when he saw this. He turned to look at Yuan Liangzi and the others around him and realized that they all had cold expressions on their faces. It was obvious that they could see the fate of the pseudo-sage cultivators. How powerful would the array formation be if everyone needed the help of a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure to set up? Since they already had powerful treasures like level 8 pseudo-sage treasures, why would they still need the help of so many cultivators to set up the array formation? With just one look, it was obvious that setting up this formation required some sort of intrinsic help from these cultivators. Obviously, it wasn't a good thing for the cultivators to make use of this irreplaceable intrinsic quality. Since they had already seen it, it was impossible for the many cultivators not to see it. However, even though they could see it, they only looked sorrowful. They didn't even dare to say a word, let alone resist. This made Luo Fan and the others feel a chill down their spines. "Let's do it," Hao Zun said. At his command, the many cultivators each took out their identical level 8 pseudo-sage treasures that looked like triangular flags. In an instant, the hundreds of flags suddenly emitted intense light and began to connect with each other. All the light rays circulated between each flag. Every time the light circulated, it would become more intense, and every time it circulated, it would cause the flag to change its position, causing the hundreds of people on the auspicious cloud to gradually disperse. In the void, at the exit of the space-time tunnel, they formed an extremely mysterious three-dimensional diagram that was indescribable with words. As the three-dimensional image was constantly adjusted, the light rays emitted by the flags gradually condensed and formed a figure that was only 990 feet tall and looked extremely similar to the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator appeared. At first, this figure was extremely fake and illusory. It seemed illusory, and it would tremble from time to time. It looked like some kind of unstable holographic image. However, this huge figure had already begun to emit an aura that only a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator could have. It even carried some kind of immortality, a kind of eternal and indestructible aura of a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator. As soon as Luo Fan saw this figure, his eyes suddenly flashed with disbelief. This is the aura of a holy will. How is this possible? Chapter 1374. The moment this figure appeared, the 666 pseudo-saint grade cultivators let out blood-curdling screams. Amidst the screams, the aura around them seemed to have been added to a pile of firewood, and it became even more powerful. The incomparably powerful aura overlapped and gradually formed a strange aura world. Although this aura world wasn't very vast, it was more condensed and tyrannical. In this world, even the rules and laws of the Devil Realm and the Great Tao of the Devil Realm were repelled. Previously, these pseudo-saint grade cultivators had been like ants to Yuan Venerates, Hao Zun, and the level 9 pseudo-saint grade cultivators of the mystic Yang Sky. They had been bullied, and plotted against by Yuan Venerates, Hao Zun, and the level 9 pseudo-saint grade cultivators of the mystic Yang Sky. In fact, a pseudo-saint grade cultivator, even a small level 1 pseudo-saint grade cultivator, was enough to suppress the sky and earth and cause shocking damage to the demon realm. Now, that the power of these 666 pseudo-saint grade cultivators had been stimulated, the power that they could conjure was much stronger than usual. One could imagine how strong the effect was. It was normal for such an aura realm to be formed. Luo Fan, Yuan Liangzi, and the others hurriedly retreated when they saw this scene. Although this aura realm didn't affect them, it was gradually expanding and they might be swallowed at any time. Given their strength, they would definitely be in trouble if they were swallowed, even if they wouldn't be completely digested by the realm immediately. At that moment, Hao Zun suddenly appeared on the auspicious cloud above them and smiled. This is the holy decree. Yuan Liangzi and the others were shocked when they saw Hao Zun suddenly appear. Luo Fan was bewildered, but he didn't want to keep a low profile anymore. Instead, he asked directly, how could such a holy decree appear? Even a level 9 venerate would need to break through to the sage realm to condense a strand of holy decree. One has to break through to the sage realm in order to condense a trace of it. There isn't even a level 9 fake sage in this array. How could there be such a powerful holy decree? Hao Zun acted as if he didn't know that Luo Fan's words meant that he wasn't simple. He smiled and said, what's impossible about that? If he couldn't condense the holy will, what kind of formation do you think is worth me spending 666 level 8 pseudo-sage treasures to set up? This clearly doesn't conform to the principles of cultivation. Cultivation principles. What were cultivation principles? Let me tell you what the true essence of cultivation is. In fact, the Khanate Grand Luo realm was already the highest realm beneath the saint realm. After that, there were 5 stages of quasi-saint and 9 stages of false saint. Due to the huge gap between the innate Grand Luo and the sage realm, there were some realms above the innate Grand Luo. Strictly speaking, these 14 realms could be considered quasi-sages. Or perhaps he was just a fake saint, since it was a realm, who said that only 9th level venerables could attack the saint realm and condense the holy decree, who said that you guys are fake saints with lower realms. No chance of becoming a saint? As he spoke, Hao Zun turned to look at Yuan Liangzi and the rest, whose expressions changed and continued. Are you feeling excited? He felt that he had cleared the fog and that his future had become extremely bright. Do you think that you've caught the tail of the saint realm? His words were strange, causing the expressions of Yuan Liangzi and the rest to change slightly, except for Luo Fan. Apart from Luo Fan, who had thought about this a long time ago and did not think as Hao Zun said, everyone else was shocked. Just as Hao Zun had said, Yuan Liangzi and the rest were stirred up by Hao Zun's words and felt excited. They felt that they had caught the truth of cultivation and that the distance between them and the saint realm was not that far away anymore. Now that Hao Zun had said that, they had a bad feeling. They felt that what Hao Zun was going to say next was going to kick them into a bottomless abyss, just like their excitement. Ha ha ha! Hao Zun laughed out loud. As he laughed aloud, the formation composed of the 666 pseudo-sage sages had been activated to the extreme. Because their auras had reached the peak, the world of auras became like a real world. A world that was embedded into the demon realm was formed in the void, completely covering the boundless sea area below, making this place look like the boundary between the demon realm and other worlds. Translator, Zephy editor, Dio Quinn as he laughed out loud. The formation of the 666 pseudo-sage sages had been activated to the extreme. Amidst the aura, the figure that looked like Hao Zun and had a holy will condensed by the formation had taken on a real appearance. The eternal and indestructible aura on his body was so strong that it was almost visible to the naked eye. Everyone seemed to have seen the embryonic form of a saint. At this moment, the 666 cultivators were reduced to skin and bones. Even their origin of life and their vitality were almost completely drained. Only a tiny bit of origin of life remained in the depths of their divine souls, faintly swaying as a sign to the outside world that they were still alive. This tragic state was many times worse than when their energy had been sucked dry by the Yuan Venerate. Back when their energy had been sucked dry by the Yuan Venerate to set up the array formation, even though their vitality and life source had been sucked dry, it hadn't been a one-off extraction. Instead, there had been room for them to recover so that they could at least recover through cultivation after leaving that state. However, this time, the vitality and life source that had been sucked dry weren't the same as the Yuan Venerates. They were the target of the extraction. The depletion of their vitality and life source was the result of a deeper form of depletion. In other words, what these fake saints had lost was many times more precious than the life source and vitality on the surface. Yuan Liangzi and the others, as well as Luo Fan, couldn't help but get goosebumps when they saw the changes in everyone. They understood that these pseudo-sages were most likely crippled. Even if they managed to escape with their lives, they would not be able to survive. Even if they managed to escape with their lives, it would be difficult for them to recover their current cultivation in the future. In fact, it was very likely that they wouldn't even be able to enter the pseudo-saint level again. Hao Zun didn't care about those cultivators. He didn't even glance at them. He laughed heartily and said to Yuan Liangzi and the others, "If you really think as I said, then you are gravely mistaken." The Yuan Venerate seemed a little proud and a little crazy. It's precisely because these 14 cultivation realms belong to the Xiantian Zenith Luo realm that it's even more despairing. The gap between the Xiantian Zenith Luo realm and the Sage realm was infinite. Therefore, even if the 14 cultivation realms were divided, it would still be impossible to overcome the infinite gap between them. Seriously speaking, even 140 cultivation realms, 1,400 cultivation realms, or even 14,000 cultivation realms that were divided into these 14 realms wouldn't be able to close the gap. If anyone can break through to the Sage realm, it means that no one is qualified to break through to the Sage realm. Now, do you still have confidence? Ha ha ha. Hao Zun's words. If it had been said by an ordinary person, Yuan Liangzi and the others would have thought that it was just nonsense. However, it had come from the mouth of a powerful level 9 pseudo-saint level venerate. To them, it was impossible for them to take it lightly. All of a sudden, Yuan Liangzi and the others felt the same intense despair as before. If even a level 9 venerate was so desperate about becoming a sage, what was the point of cultivators like them who were still a long way from becoming a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator? For a moment, they were at a loss. It was to the extent that even their auras became slightly unstable. As they fluctuated, they even shook the surrounding space-time, causing it to distort. There were even many bolts of lightning flashing within the space-time, destroying everything within it. Of course, these thunderbolts didn't affect Luo Fan and the others at all. Even level 1 pseudo-saint level cultivators couldn't be affected by any natural thunderbolts, let alone Luo Fan, who was already a level 4 pseudo-saint level cultivator. These thunderbolts were millions of times denser than before, so it was just like taking a shower of thunderbolts for them. Hao Zun didn't care about Yuan Liangzi and the others at all. Of course, he didn't say all this just to give them pointers. He was just venting his emotions. Why would he care about what they thought? He pointed at the 666 pseudo-saint level cultivators who had turned into skin and bones and said with a smile, "Do you want to know what was taken from them to turn them into this?" Yuan Liangzi and the others nodded instinctively. Hao Zun smiled again and said, "What was taken from them was the cultivation essence that simulated the holy decree that they formed after breaking through to the innate Grand Luo. It is precisely because their cultivation essences are combined together that they are able to condense that holy decree." These words finally made the complexion of Luo Fan, who had always been calm, change greatly. He finally knew the true essence of this formation. Just like what Zun had said before, the 14 levels after the innate Grand Luo realm were created to close the gap between the innate Grand Luo realm and the Saint realm due to the huge gap between them. Therefore, to put another way, these 14 realms were actually a process of proving one's Tao and becoming a sage. The cultivation of these 14 realms was a concrete process of constantly transforming oneself into a sage. However, this transformation seemed to be just the beginning, even when one reached the level 9 pseudo-saint level, which was the last realm of the 14 realms. It was unable to truly achieve the goal of becoming a sage. However, this was a process of getting closer to a sage after all. The cultivation essence of the entire process was naturally to gradually simulate a sage. Under normal circumstances, this kind of simulation was abstract and difficult to detect. The benefits it brought were also contained in one's cultivation and could not be detected. However, if one could extract this abstract simulation, suppress the other aspects, and extract one of them, one would naturally be able to obtain a simulated holy decree. It was obviously not strange for several simulated holy decrees to be condensed together to give birth to a holy decree. The formation that Hao Zun had set up was to condense this abstract cultivation essence and convert it into a holy decree to augment the figure that was condensed from infinite power. From then on, the figure would have the terrifying power of a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator who had broken through to the sage state. After understanding the truth, Luo Fan suddenly felt a little lucky. He was glad that he did not escape from the platform directly and did not rush into the passage immediately after escaping Yuan Zun's control. These two holy decrees were hidden in his body. Compared to other cultivators, he was more suitable to set up formations. If he had directly rushed into Hao Zun's hands, he would have been the one lying there now. At this moment, Yuan Liangzi suddenly asked, after their cultivation essence is extracted, "What will happen to them? What will happen to them?" Luo Fan could not help but be impressed when he heard this. He was indeed a level 8 pseudo-saint level after all. He had actually recovered so quickly after suffering such a blow. He turned and cuffed Yuan Liangzi. However, he realized that Yuan Liangzi did not look any different on the surface, but there was an indescribable viciousness hidden between his brows. Obviously, he had not regained his composure because he had seen through Hao Zun's words. He was merely suppressing his viciousness and forcefully maintaining his composure. If he had the chance to explode, the viciousness would definitely be earth-shattering. Hao Zun did not care about Yuan Liangzi's viciousness and smiled. They will naturally not be able to cultivate in the future after losing their cultivation essence. They're next, unless there was a great opportunity. Otherwise, I'll be stuck at the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm for the rest of my life. At this time, Scholar Hong finally opened his mouth. They clearly know this. Are you also willing to set up a formation? Zun Hao smiled and said, "Do you think their wishes will affect me?" Moreover, it wasn't a bad thing even if he stopped at the innate golden immortal realm for his entire life. In any case, he couldn't become a saint. As long as I can live forever, what's the difference between a Khanate Grand Luo and a false saint? Yuan Liangzi said coldly. Then you. Why did he have to cultivate to the 9th level of the pseudo-divine stage? Why don't you cripple your cultivation and become a Khanate Grand Luo? As soon as Luo Fan heard this, he knew that his hostility had begun to rise. He sighed and took a step back. Hao Zun turned to look at Yuan Liangzi, the smile on his face slowly disappearing. Looks like I've given you too many misconceptions. As he said this, the aura that was initially hidden on his body began to rise. Gradually, the surrounding space-time began to distort. An aura that was even more powerful, more realistic, and more shocking than the aura of the 666 false saints overlapped faintly, filled the surroundings. Such an aura existed in an extremely strange form. It seemed to exist in reality, but did not have much of an impact on the demon world. At least, it did not have the domineering effect of the 666 false saints' overlapped auras that pushed the surrounding space-time apart, as if it was recreating the world. Instead, it was like a silent nourishment, allowing everyone present to feel its existence and know that they had fallen into it. They could also feel the pressure that was enough to break one's spirit, but they did not really come into contact with anything in the world. Under this aura, Hao Zun seemed to have become extremely tall and powerful in front of everyone. Although he was just standing there quietly, he was like a demonic god that had existed since the ancient times, bringing great shock to everyone. This aura was faintly emitted, shocking everyone on the auspicious cloud. Among them, the one who was affected the most was Yuan Liangzi. Yuan Liangzi could no longer suppress the hostility between his brows and suddenly burst out. He roared, "Why? Why? Why are you telling us all this? Why are you toying with us like this?" As he yelled, a huge ball of light appeared on his body. It was a ball of light that emitted endless light and heat, even causing the surrounding space-time to distort and collapse. This was obviously a level 8 false saint treasure. Although a magical treasure that looked like a ball of light looked a little strange, the aura and appearance on it were obviously a level 8 false saint treasure. Luo Fan and the rest knew something was wrong when they saw this. They quickly retreated, and in the blink of an eye, they were hundreds of miles away. Although they could not escape from Hao Zun's aura, they tried their best to get as far away from Yuan Liangzi as possible. Just as they regained their footing, Yuan Liangzi had already charged towards Hao Zun with the ball of light. The power of this collision was earth-shattering. Even Luo Fan could vaguely feel the demon world shake a little. The great Tao that had merged with the nomological law layer seemed to have been separated from this area due to this terrifying collision. One could imagine how terrifying this collision was. Hao Zun merely raised his hand and clenched it expressionlessly in the face of this collision that could even shake the demon world. The ball of light on Yuan Liangzi's body had already landed in his hand, turning into a ball the size of a fist and spinning within it. Meanwhile, Yuan Liangzi's body was directly fixed in the void by an invisible force. He maintained his fierce and violent expression as energy surged from his body and continuously spread out, distorting the surrounding space-time. Hao Zun caressed the spinning level, 8 false saint treasure, and said calmly, "Why? It seems like you're dissatisfied with the cultivation prospects that I've revealed to you." As Hao Zun spoke, a baby-like smile appeared on his face. It was a smile that had never appeared on his face ever since he had appeared. He continued, "However, I just wanted to see your expression. I wanted to see how your seemingly firm Taoist heart would crumble and crumble." Chapter 1375. After Yuan Liangzi disappeared, Hao Zun turned around and asked the remaining Luo Fan and the others, "What about you guys? Has your Tao heart collapsed?" He had a faint smile on his face. However, the craziness in his smile couldn't be any more obvious. Everyone had seen Yuan Liangzi's fate just now. Even if their cultivation had collapsed, they would still regroup due to their desire to live. Who would dare say anything else? Hao Zun didn't mind and turned to look at the aura domain. More specifically, he was looking at the other Hao Zun that had appeared in the aura domain, which contained the holy decree. At the same time, the other Hao Zun had already stepped into the space-time channel and appeared directly in the middle of the cluster of worlds. Compared to a level 9 pseudo-saint without the holy decree, the might of a level 9 pseudo-saint that had obtained the holy decree was many times stronger. The huge black tortoise formed by countless worlds was already an incredible behemoth compared to an ordinary level 9 pseudo-saint. It was enough to render a level 9 pseudo-saint like a Yuan venerate powerless and have no choice but to be confined to a certain realm. However, compared to Hao Zun, who had already condensed the holy decree, this array formation was like a gentle breeze. No matter how the worlds revolved around it, producing all sorts of incredible might and condensing power beyond imagination, it couldn't affect Hao Zun in the slightest. He floated there as though he was the master of these countless worlds. Even the way these worlds operated changed, allowing the originally extremely complete and detailed black tortoise to gradually lose its form. They gradually lost their forms and turned into a whirlpool with Hao Zun as the center. After Hao Zun changed the array formation, he raised his hand and grabbed at the small black tortoise that had originally been at the heart of the black tortoise, which was also the realm where the remnants of the demon realm had originally existed. The small black tortoise was originally stretching and shrinking like a beating heart. Suddenly, The huge black tortoise formed by many worlds was twisted and turned into a vortex. Under the pull of the vortex, the small black tortoise's way of shrinking and shrinking naturally changed. It looked as though its heart was beating erratically. When Hao Zun, who had condensed the holy decree, grabbed the black tortoise, the black tortoise was immobilized in the void, and it seemed to be suppressed by a fearsome force, unable to continue its movements. Zun Hao let out a long breath. He said, "Dai Sang." Revered Hao, who had condensed the holy will, retracted his hand. That little black tortoise, which was a world that was countless times more powerful than the great thousand worlds, collapsed in an instant. They were instantly annihilated and disappeared. Such a change triggered a strong chain reaction. In the blink of an eye, the worlds that had formed a huge whirlpool around Hao Zun collapsed one by one. The fragments of the worlds turned into smoke and spread in all directions. It was a cruel beauty. At this moment, Hao Zun revealed a doubtful expression. "It can't be that simple," as he murmured. Hao Zun, who was in the mist formed by the fragments of the world, emitted his power and swept through the surroundings. The countless fragments of the world that had turned into mist were swept away by his power. In the blink of an eye, Hao Zun was the only one left floating in the air. Hao Zun's expression turned even uglier. "It's really over." It was like a person who was bent on revenge had prepared for decades, only to realize in the end that he didn't need to prepare much at all. All he had to do was walk over and say that he was going to kill him, and the other party would die. The disappointment of punching empty air was enough to make anyone feel extremely uncomfortable. Although Hao Zun was already a level 9 pseudo-sanctuary, one could see his mentality from how he had toyed with the Dao hearts of Yuan Liangzi and the others. It was easy to imagine how depressed he was after such an experience. Feeling depressed, Hao Zun suddenly raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The level 7 and level 8 pseudo-sanctuaries beside Luo Fan instantly fell into his hands. Then, Hao Zun gently squeezed, and the cultivators collapsed one by one. They didn't even have the chance to scream before they all died, as if they had never appeared. Such a cruel thing happened to Luo Fan just like that, which was a huge blow to him. His heart raced as an indescribable sense of impending death made his expression change. Just as he thought that Hao Zun was going to crush him to death, Hao Zun stopped. He turned his gaze to another location, to the aura of the heaven and earth. At that moment, 2 figures appeared. One was a Yuan Venerate. The other was a familiar figure with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a tortoise. It was the level 9 pseudo-sanctuary that had been left behind in the mysterious Yang heaven and earth. The 2 of them didn't seem hostile at all. Instead, they seemed very harmonious and friendly. Even their powers seemed to have a mysterious connection. After they appeared, the terrain of the heaven and earth changed with a loud bang. The ground seemed to be kneaded and moved by an invisible hand as it started to change its shape rapidly. At the same time, the 666 pseudo-sanctuary cultivators, who were already skinny, suddenly emitted a strange aura. This aura didn't belong to these pseudo-sanctuaries. Instead, it belonged to someone else. It belonged to a Yuan Venerate. Under the influence of the 666 Yuan Venerate's aura, Hao Zun, who had just condensed a holy decree that had destroyed many realms, suddenly collapsed. The invisible holy decree split into 2 and entered the body of the Yuan Venerate and the other person in the heaven and earth aura. Instantly, the auras of the 2 of them started to skyrocket, causing the time and space around them to distort even more intensely. Although all this took a long time to describe, it actually happened at an unimaginable speed. It even seemed to have transcended time. By the time Luo Fan saw it clearly, everything had already been settled. Luo Fan suddenly felt that he wasn't surprised at all when he saw everything that was supposed to happen. Indeed, a level 9 pseudo-sanctuary, a level 9 pseudo-sanctuary. Luo Fan wasn't surprised, as this wasn't surprising at all. However, Hao Zun's reaction was a little strange. He wasn't angry that he had been schemed against. Instead, he was a little excited. "Indeed, I knew that you wouldn't die so easily." Taoist Hao Zun, you have failed again this time, the Yuan Venerate said. Hao Zun laughed excitedly. I have failed. No, no, no. I have not failed. The deity had achieved unprecedented success, because I have forced you to cooperate with the remnants of the demon realm. You have truly betrayed the main world and our realm. You, from today onwards, you will never be recognized by a sage again. Your path to becoming a sage has finally been completely severed. Ha ha ha. Hao Zun's laughter didn't hold back at all. The rumbling laughter spread in all directions, shaking the space-time. It shook the nomological laws. It shook the great path. In an instant, Luo Fan, who was wrapped up in this laughter, couldn't help but feel an inexplicable sense of amusement welling up in his heart. He almost couldn't help but laugh out loud. Startled, he hurriedly used the power of the divine court sky cauldron to suppress his spirit. He finally managed to extricate himself from that strange laughter. When his spirit returned to normal, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of helplessness. Although he already knew that a level 9 false sage was unparalleled, just this laughter, which wasn't directed at him, was already somewhat unbearable. What a huge blow to him, the Yuan Venerate said nonchalantly. The path to becoming a sage? Don't you know very well? We have no hope of becoming a sage in the first place. There are 54 sages in this world, and each sage has at least 10 disciples under them. Even if a sage allows someone to become a sage, that person will definitely appear among them. Although people like us are known as venerable ones, compared to them, we are nothing. No matter how much we try to please the sages, becoming a sage is just an extravagant hope for us, isn't it? The Yuan Venerate paused and suddenly smiled. Furthermore, how do you know that I am not doing this under the orders of a sage? Hao Zun's expression didn't change at all when he heard the first part, as if these words couldn't reach his heart. However, his expression changed slightly when he heard the last part. Although what he said before was correct, it was not enough. However, it couldn't be denied that before today, the Yuan Venerate had an insignificant hope of becoming a sage. Although this hope was so small that it was almost non-existent, it was still different from nothing. Now, after today's incident, the Yuan Venerate didn't even have this tiny hope anymore. No matter how nice and open-minded the Yuan Venerate sounded, this was already a victory for him. It meant that his plan today had worked. However, the last part of the sentence completely overturned his plan. If this incident was the result of an order from a sage, if this demon realm remnant before him was someone the sage wanted to rope in and their cooperation was arranged by a sage, then all his previous deductions would be meaningless. On the contrary, his plan today might actually help the Yuan Venerate gain a higher status in the eyes of certain sage. At this thought, Hao Zun shouted, "Impossible! These remnants of the demon realm invaded this world and almost caused the destruction of the world. They have committed heinous sins. How could the sage rope them in?" The Yuan Venerate chuckled and said, "You can guess. Did I lie to deliberately attack you? Or was it really the saint who asked me to do this?" The level 9 pseudo-sage beside the Yuan Venerate also smiled and said, "Is there a need to guess? If it wasn't for the sage's orders, how would I have dared to step foot into this world? How would I have dared to bring my people into your world?" These words were like a final veil being lifted, completely dispelling any wishful thinking that Hao Zun still had. Regardless of his standpoint, what the level 9 pseudo-sage said was right. For such a long time, he didn't even dare to step into this world. He only dared to open up a world outside of this world for the remnants of the devil realm to live and reproduce. But now, he actually dared to step into this world and even took his people with him, abandoning the world that they had lived in for countless years to step into this world. Could it be that he couldn't see the changes in the situation? Hao Zun's expression fluctuated for a while before he suddenly took a deep breath. So that's how it is. I didn't want to offend them at first. However, it seems like some things have to be done now. Everyone present instantly had an inexplicable doubt. They didn't know what Hao Zun was talking about or who he was referring to. At that moment, an indescribable feeling suddenly enveloped Luo Fan, making him feel like an ordinary person being stared at by a five-clawed divine dragon. Then he realized that the Yuan Venerate's palm had unknowingly penetrated deep into his body through his heart. A strange feeling was born. In a trance, he felt the palm penetrate deep into the internal space-time layers of his body. Layer by layer, it finally broke through the limits and reached a depth that Luo Fan couldn't detect. He didn't know what it was. The arm penetrated deep into Luo Fan's body. Hao Zun's face naturally appeared in front of Luo Fan. The distance between him and Luo Fan, it wasn't even a foot. This was the closest this had ever happened to Luo Fan when he was facing a level 9 pseudo-sage. At that moment, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. In a trance, Luo Fan understood why Hao Zun had treated him differently back then, why Hao Zun hadn't been surprised by his calm performance, why Hao Zun had crushed a level 7 pseudo-sage and a level 8 pseudo-sage when he had vented his anger, and why Hao Zun had said that he didn't want to offend them, but now he had to. All of this was because of the two holy wills that the divine Venerate and his disciple had injected into the space-time deep within his body. At that moment, Hao Zun was grabbing at these two holy wills. The moment Hao Zun moved, the expressions of a Yuan Venerate and a level 9 pseudo-sage of mysterious sun sky changed slightly. At this time, they cast their probing eyes on Luo Fan for the first time. The Yuan Venerate was the first to see the flaw and couldn't help but curse. Damn it, there are actually two hidden holy wills besides a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Very soon, the level 9 pseudo-sage of mysterious sun sky also saw this, and his expression changed drastically. You didn't say that there would be two more level 9 Venerates participating. If I had known, I wouldn't have cooperated with you no matter what. The Yuan Venerate quickly calmed down and said, "Don't worry, I have already hidden many trump cards on these cultivators. What I am using now is just one of them." As she said that, she raised her hand and the aura collapsed with a loud bang. Along with the aura, the 666 pseudo-sage cultivators and the 666 level 8 pseudo-sage treasures that had completely fused with these cultivators also collapsed. After they collapsed, specks of light emerged from where they had collapsed and began to condense rapidly. However, this time, they didn't converge into the bodies of the two of them. Instead, they converged directly into the body of the Yuan Venerate. As the specks of light converged, the holy will aura emitted from the Yuan Venerate's body, which was only half the size of Hao Zun's body, began to strengthen rapidly and finally became complete. They were all level 9 pseudo-sages. Although they had spoken and acted, it had all happened in a very short time. The entire process had been completed almost without any need for time. At that moment, Hao Zun's arm was pulled away from Luo Fan's body. In his hands were two formless holy wills that exuded an aura of indestructibility, and indestructibility. At that moment, Luo Fan felt an unimaginable pain surging from the depths of his body. He even felt the layers of time and space in the depths of his body collapsing layer by layer. He could feel the countless spaces and worlds in between the layers of time and space rapidly shattering. Following this process, his body began to gradually collapse. A strong feeling that he was walking towards death, that his life essence was gradually withering away, enveloped him. An inexplicable fear naturally arose. However, even this fear and all sorts of feelings seemed to gradually drift away from him. The darkness that was getting stronger and more obvious gradually drowned him. He seemed to be falling into the abyss of eternal stillness, falling into a place where he would never be able to reincarnate. So, this is how it feels to have one's holy will extracted. Is this a normal reaction, or is this what the divine Venerate and his disciple did to me back then? A thought suddenly emerged in his mind amidst the stillness of his thoughts. He knew very well that he was heading towards death and destruction. His body, his soul, his will, his consciousness, his senses, everything about him was heading towards extinction. Time seemed to slow down as he gradually walked towards the abyss and towards death. In the end, at some point in time, Everything seemed to have come to a standstill, as if time had stopped. Countless memories and thoughts suddenly appeared out of nowhere in this state of stillness. They occupied this originally boundless, pitch-black space and began to evolve in the order they had been in before. Again and again, it made him feel as though he was reliving his entire life and his entire life. At a certain moment, he suddenly had a strange realization. How Zun's words, which he initially couldn't understand, suddenly became extremely clear and understandable. Chapter 1376. As he came to this realization, his body began to emit an extremely wondrous charm. This kind of charm was almost indestructible and almost indestructible. This was shockingly a kind of holy will, but it was different from holy will. This kind of charm was not as eternal as the holy decree. It was indestructible, but it had a potential that the holy decree did not have. It had the potential to continuously improve, strengthen, and grow. If one had to make a comparison, this kind of charm was still quite different from the holy decree. It was like a small spring, small but able to continuously gush out spring water. Although the holy decree obtained by a level 9 pseudo-saint was as vast as the ocean, it would only decrease and not increase. When this charm appeared, Luo Fan felt that the boundless darkness around him had completely disappeared. What replaced it was an indescribable clarity. In his body, the infinite space-time and the layers of space-time was instantly reconstructed in a very strange and mysterious way. Layers of space-time were reconstructed, causing the scene inside Luo Fan's body to not only return to its peak, but also improve by one level. Compared to the past, it had become more stable and more mysterious. I'm on the road to the Sage Realm, and so are the level 9 fake saints. Although they've gone further than me, they're on the same path. In this way, although I can't really do what a level 9 fake saint can do, it's absolutely possible to do something a little bit inferior. This was the enlightenment that Luo Fan had just now, and this point was clear to him. It instantly stimulated the essence of cultivation that Luo Fan had ever since he became a sage-to-be, causing his entire person to change dramatically. This change did not allow his cultivation to advance to an unimaginable level. Instead, it allowed him to unleash the various powers that he had obtained by imitating the powers of a saint that he should have originally possessed and had already obtained. Among them, this included the holy decree that was not as mysterious as the holy decree, but its essence was exactly the same. It was this holy decree that caused the collapse of the holy decree caused by the loss of the Divine Lord and his disciple to instantly gain new support. The true support that belonged to him was formed once again. This allowed Luo Fan, who was on the verge of death, to recover. When Luo Fan recovered, he realized that less than a moment had passed since Zun Hao extracted the 2 saint wills from his body. At this moment, the 2 invisible saint wills in Hao Zun's hands left his body. As for the Yuan Venerate, only then did he manage to turn the 666 pseudo-sage cultivators and 666 pseudo-sage level 8 treasures into nourishment for his holy decree. This allowed the holy decree he possessed to become truly complete. At this moment, the profound Yang Heaven's rank 9 false divine sage's face changed. His body swayed, and a black tortoise appeared behind him. This was a huge battle array. It contained the essence of billions of worlds that had been destroyed by Hao Zun and possessed incredible defensive strength. Although it did not have much resistance against a profound Yang Heaven's rank 9 false divine sage, it was almost an impenetrable iron wall for ordinary profound Yang Heaven's rank 9 false divine sages. Although such an array formation, in addition to the half of the holy decree that Hao Zun had obtained, might not be able to completely block a Yuan Venerate or Hao Zun, it would definitely not be a problem for him to hold them off for some time, while waiting for reinforcements from the other party. The Yuan Venerate did not care that the profound Yang Heaven's rank 9 false divine sage beside him was obviously wary of him. He had a look of pity on his face. However, He did not know if he was feeling pity for the 666 pseudo-sage level 8 treasures, the 666 pseudo-sage cultivators, or the trump cards he had placed in the bodies of the pseudo-sage cultivators. She raised her hand and grabbed at the void where Haozun was. In an instant, a strange space-time appeared around Haozun's body. After this space-time appeared, it seemed to trigger a chain reaction as countless space-times were born one after another. These countless space-times had an unimaginably powerful splitting ability. They wrapped around Haozun and targeted him, trying to separate his entire body into countless tiny parts. At this moment, Haozun laughed out loud. As he laughed, the two holy wills in his hands suddenly swelled and formed an invisible area around his body that was enveloped by the holy decree, completely blocking the boundless space-time. At the same time, it also enveloped Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan's aura, which was similar to the holy will, was released, and Zun Hao sensed it. In an instant, Haozun had a look of disbelief on his face. At the same time, the Yuan Venerate and the profound Yang Heaven's rank 9 false divine sage also had a look of disbelief on their faces. Everyone's eyes were on Luo Fan. Even at this moment, the two Saint Wills in Haozun's hands had completely blocked off the countless space-time and even destroyed the space-time to restore the surroundings to normal. However, it did not attract the attention of the two parties. Haozun murmured as his eyes turned bloodshot. How is this possible? How can this holy decree exist? Luo Fan was secretly shocked by their strange gazes. He didn't care about anything else, and immediately took out the divine sky cauldron. It hung high above his head. He discovered the changes in himself the moment he took out the divine sky cauldron. In the past, he had taken out the divine sky cauldron like an ordinary person taking out a mountain. Even though he knew that this mountain possessed incredible power and extraordinary destructive power, he had always felt powerless. However, he felt powerless. He was always worried that he would collapse and be destroyed at any moment because he could not bear the weight of this huge mountain. However, at this moment, all he felt was an indescribable sense of ease and unimaginable freedom. It was as if the divine sky cauldron had become one of his arms and a part of his body. The power of the divine sky cauldron itself no longer pressured him. It was no longer pressuring him. Instead, it had become his own strength. Thanks to this powerful support, he suddenly felt that the rank 9 false divine sages in front of him weren't as high and mighty as before. In his daze, he could even faintly sense that it had become an extremely difficult task for them to kill him. In fact, he even had a strange feeling that the level 9 pseudo-divine sage in profound Yang Heaven and Earth had suddenly become much weaker. He felt as if he only needed to grab it with one hand. He would be able to break through the barrier of the array formation on the surface of his body and hurt his body directly. Luo Fan muttered, "This is the effect of will." An inexplicable smile gradually appeared on his face. As Luo Fan mumbled, the expressions on Haozun and the others' faces changed. In their eyes, this person in front of them, it had completely fused with the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure above its head. The intent that was similar to holy will was directly added to the magic treasure. It caused the magic treasure's power to increase greatly. If they wanted to hurt this person like before, it would be as difficult as hurting a rank 9 false divine sage. It was as difficult as hurting a rank 9 false divine sage with holy will. This kind of change was completely beyond their imagination. In a trance, they suddenly had a feeling that they didn't think they would ever have. They suspected that they were dreaming. As their emotions surged, they suddenly felt that the fight between them was meaningless. The space-time gradually returned to its normal state. The boundless sea reappeared below, and even the space-time passageway gradually disappeared. It seemed as if nothing had happened. The rank 9 false divine sage of profound Yang Heaven spoke at this moment. "You're Luo Fan, right?" Luo Fan raised his eyebrows. The fact that this rank 9 false divine sage was saying this meant that he was starting to take him seriously. Luo Fan couldn't help but smile faintly and nod. That's right. The rank 9 false divine sage said, "My name is Gomard. According to the customs of the demon realm, you can call me Mozun." Yuan venerates, and the others called profound Yang Heaven the demon realm, because it was a completely different world compared to the demon realm. It was a world that had invaded this world. Obviously, the demon realm was also a different world compared to profound Yang Heaven. It was also the target of their invasion, so it was naturally the true demon realm. No one present was surprised by this form of address. They weren't in the mood to refute it. On the contrary, Yuan Venerate smiled faintly and said to Luo Fan, "You are now qualified to be called a Venerate. Perhaps I can teach you Luo Zun?" Luo Fan was taken aback when he heard this. He repeated Luo Zun. Hao Zun took a deep breath and said, "That's right. Even though your cultivation isn't at the 9th level of the false divine realm, you're still a saint. Although your cultivation isn't at the level of a rank 9 false divine sage, your current performance isn't something an ordinary rank 9 false divine sage can achieve. There's nothing wrong with calling yourself a Venerate." Luo Fan knew that the three of them definitely had something to say when they persuaded him to call himself a Venerate. He didn't beat around the bush and said, "Let's not talk about calling myself a Venerate first. What exactly do you want to say? Please speak your mind." The three Yuan Venerates exchanged a glance and saw a smile in each other's eyes. Even Hao Zun, who had seemed a little crazy before, seemed normal now. His hatred for Yuan Venerates had completely disappeared, and he seemed like two good friends with Yuan Venerates. In the end, it was Hao Zun who spoke. "We would like to discuss the Tao with you." "That's right." The two Yuan Venerates smiled. Luo Fan was taken aback. "Discuss the Tao? You must be joking. I've only set foot on the 4th platform. Compared to all of you, I'm still miles away. Even if I have the ability to escape from all of you, I'm only relying on the power of my treasures. How can my experience compare to all of you? How am I qualified to discuss the Tao with all of you?" Hao Zun laughed. Normally, a cultivator on the 4th platform wouldn't be able to escape from the few of us, even if he had 100 level 9 false divine treasures. It's already extraordinary for you to be able to do this with a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Even if you're a little weak, you're definitely not weak. Mo Zun chuckled. "Forget it. Do we still care about face in front of the Tao? I want to find the path to the Tao from you. I hope you can give me some pointers." Yuan Venerate and Venerate Hao both sighed and nodded their heads in acknowledgement. Luo Fan was taken aback when he heard this. The doubts in his heart were finally resolved when he saw the expressions of the three of them. So that's why. The three of them saw the hope of becoming sages from him. They saw the possibility of their improvement. There were all sorts of disputes between the three of them. There were all sorts of grudges. It seemed like they couldn't live under the same sky and wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. However, this was all. It was only because of their despair. Because they couldn't see the direction to advance. Because they couldn't see the possibility of advancing further. In other words, the fundamental reason why they were fighting each other. It was because they couldn't see the hope of becoming sages. For a Class 9, pseudo-saint who had cultivated for trillions of years and regarded cultivation as their everything, and regarded becoming a saint as their ultimate goal, not being able to see the hope of becoming a saint was equivalent to cutting off all their hopes. It was equivalent to eliminating everything that supported them in their lives. Such an outcome was obviously an indescribable blow to their Tao hearts. It was precisely because of this that they cared about the enmity between them and schemed against each other. Otherwise, why would a level 9 false divine who was only one step away from becoming a sage not work hard to cultivate and become a sage? Why would they risk their lives to fight each other? Even if they had any grudges, wouldn't they be able to do whatever they wanted after becoming a sage? They wanted the other party to die in any way they wanted. But now, they saw an unprecedented possibility in Luo Fan. Their hopes of becoming a sage that had been shattered suddenly reignited. Their Tao hearts that had many cracks were naturally formed again. In this way, the enmity that they held in such high regard before was naturally no longer important. Even the so-called battle between the orthodox and devil paths and the so-called fading out of the demon realm to invade the main world were no longer important. In front of the path of becoming a sage, everything else was insignificant. After understanding the thoughts of the three of them, Luo Fan was relieved. He was able to make such great progress and use his level 4 false divine court heavenly cauldron to perfectly control the level 9 false divine court heavenly cauldron and obtain a will that was similar to a sage's will. On the surface, it seemed like he had understood what Hao Zun had said and stimulated his cultivation essence, allowing him to obtain many sage-like powers. However, the real reason was that his cultivation essence was close enough to the path of becoming a sage and could simulate the power of a sage. His comprehension of what Hao Zun had said had merely stimulated his cultivation essence. What had really allowed him to achieve what he had now, and what had shocked Venerate Hao and Yuan Venerate Hao and made them feel like they saw hope of becoming a saint again, was his cultivation essence. And obviously for Luo Fan, the essence of his cultivation was that he had his own unique worldview that was completely compatible with him. It was completely different from anyone else, any world, any heaven and earth, and any universe. Apart from this, everything else, including his flawless state, didn't affect his foundation. Of course, his comprehension of Hao Zun's words wasn't considered a big deal. However, his flawless state was even more profound. Unless he had no other choice, he was absolutely unwilling to reveal it. This wasn't because he was being selfish, but because the three people in front of him had schemed against him before. Hao Zun had even almost played him to death. Faced with these three people, he couldn't have any good feelings towards them, no matter how well they spoke. Therefore, Luo Fan said, "Seniors, you're too polite. How can I guide you on the path of becoming a sage?" Senior Hao Zun was the main reason why I was able to achieve such a huge breakthrough all of a sudden. Hao Zun said thoughtfully, "As for me, I don't think I gave you any pointers just now." Luo Fan smiled bitterly and said, "The 2 holy intents in your hands were placed into the space-time within my body by the 2 seniors because they thought highly of me. After the 2 holy intents entered my body, they fused with the deep layers of space-time within my body. They were almost inseparable and undetectable. When Senior Hao Zun extracted the 2 holy intents, the space-time within my body was completely chaotic and collapsed, causing me to be on the brink of death." Hao Zun looked a little embarrassed when he heard this. Regardless of whether he was embarrassed or ashamed of his previous behavior, he had to show such an expression when he wanted to ask Luo Fan and ask for advice from Luo Fan. Otherwise, it would be considered a provocation and an attempt to provoke Luo Fan. How could he, who had found hope of becoming a sage, do such a thing? Yuan Zun and Mo Zun looked at Hao Zun with dissatisfaction, as if they were condemning Hao Zun on behalf of Luo Fan. This was a necessary gesture. How could Luo Fan not know what they were trying to say? He sneered inwardly but said with a smile, "I'm not blaming Senior Hao Zun. On the contrary, I have to thank you for your help. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to comprehend the true meaning of your words and achieve what I have today." His words surprised Hao Zun and the others. Chapter 1377. Next, Luo Fan used the most accurate words he could to describe what he had comprehended at the last moment. As a 4th-level pseudo-saint level being, his ability to use words to describe the mysteries of the Great Path was naturally unimaginable. His narration struck Hao Zun and the others like they were struck by lightning. In an instant, everyone's eyes became a little dazed. In his eyes, there seemed to be an endless stream of runes and diagrams pouring out in torrents and flowing. When Luo Fan saw their expressions, he instantly knew that they had comprehended a lot of things from his words. He could not help but show a faint smile on his face. Of course, he was not pleased that they had comprehended something. Instead, he knew that since they had comprehended something, it meant that they believed in him. This also meant that they wouldn't take him seriously anymore. It was no longer a problem for him to leave now. In other words, when they comprehended the mysteries contained in his words, it meant that Luo Fan had already escaped. How could he not feel happy about this? The 3 of them stood in the void for a few days. In the end, the first to change was Hao Zun. In the blink of an eye, a strange aura suddenly surged out from his body. This intent was different from the holy decree. Although it had a hint of eternal and indestructible charm, it was still far from the holy decree. It was so much so that it was at least 10 times worse than Luo Fan's divine will, which seemed like a divine will, yet wasn't. But even so, this was a power that had completely fused with him and was completely under his control. It was an intent that could never be taken away. With this intent, the strength that he could display was not any weaker than when he had grasped the Saint Will. Such a huge improvement was enough to make any level 9 pseudo-saint level be delighted or even shocked. Hao Zun also came back to his senses at this moment. An indescribable sense of satisfaction and carefreeness appeared on his face. The radiance emitted from his face. It was as if a person who had been walking in the darkness suddenly had a bright light in front of him, and he could see the endless road in front of him. As Venerate Hao's body changed, similar changes also happened to Yuan Venerate Mo and Venerate Hao. Their bodies also emitted a will that seemed like a saint's will, but was not. As for the will on their bodies, it was similar to the true holy will. In fact, it was much weaker than the will on Luo Fan's body. It was a kind of eternal and indestructible charm. They were far from it. However, just like Hao Zun, although their intents weren't as good as Hao Zun's, the increase in their abilities was extremely powerful, almost reaching a whole new level. It had reached a level similar to when he had obtained the Holy Decree. Yuan Venerate and Venerate Mo even expelled the holy intent that they had painstakingly searched for in order to better integrate this intent that belonged to them. Their bodies were only left with the will that belonged to them. By the time the 3 of them came back to their senses, there were 4 holy intents floating in the void in front of everyone. They were like 4 invisible air currents that no one was willing to collect. Hao Zun and the other 2 looked at each other and smiled. They bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you, Taoist Luo Fan." After saying that, they turned around and took a step forward. They went in 2 different directions and disappeared in front of Luo Fan, leaving the 4 holy intents behind. It was as if they had really treated them like ordinary air. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little helpless as he watched them leave so decisively. Previously, for the sake of the holy wills, they even schemed against each other, turning the hundreds of pseudo-sage cultivators into pawns and food, completely destroying them. Now that the holy wills had been condensed, they had abandoned the holy wills as if they were worn-out shoes, as if they did not care at all. Although their departure was a little out of Luo Fan's expectations, it wasn't something he couldn't understand. To Hao Zun and the others, no matter how nice their words were and how they addressed Luo Fan as Luo Zun. However, it didn't change the fact that Luo Fan was a 4th level pseudo-saint level cultivator, and they were 9th level pseudo-saint level. In other words, they couldn't change the fact that Luo Fan had a relatively low status in their hearts. Therefore, no matter what, they still looked down on Luo Fan in their hearts. Under the circumstances, they thought that they had already obtained the truth about how powerful Luo Fan was, and that they already knew the best cultivation experience that Luo Fan could give them. How could they still think highly of Luo Fan? How could they possibly stay and waste their breath on Luo Fan? To them, leaving was a matter of course. As for why the eternal and indestructible intent in Luo Fan's intent was more powerful than theirs, they only thought that Luo Fan was the first to comprehend it, so he was given preferential treatment. They didn't think that Luo Fan had anything that could inspire them. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh as he watched them leave. He looked at the 4 holy intents in front of him with a headache and hesitated. He had already comprehended his own intent, so these holy intents were completely meaningless to him. However, it was obvious that these holy intents were good stuff, even though they didn't mean much to him. It would indeed be a pity to waste it here. After thinking about it, Luo Fan controlled the divine quartz heavenly cauldron and wrapped it around the holy intents. He then turned around and took a light step forward, teleporting away from this troublesome place. This time, Luo Fan didn't go to a mortal town to live. Instead, he opened up a cave residence on an uninhabited island and entered it to deal with the four holy intents. Among the four holy intents, two of them were from the divine Lord and his disciple. He didn't know if there were any hidden schemes. Before he figured it out, he didn't dare to use these two holy intents. Fortunately, he now had his own intent. He was no longer at a complete loss when it came to dealing with these two holy intents. Instead, he had all kinds of necessary means to figure out the authenticity of these two holy intents. His intent, although its level was far inferior to the holy intents, the two were essentially the same existence. It was like using a lathe with lower precision to create a lathe with higher precision through various means. Using his intent, there was hope that he could study the mystery of the holy intents. The divine quartz heavenly cauldron had now become a part of his body. He used the power of the divine quartz heavenly cauldron as if he was using his own strength. Moreover, in the process of using this power, he could instinctively obtain the abilities that a level 9 pseudo-saint should have. As a result, the cave residence he opened up was many times more powerful than the cave residence he opened up in the past. It was countless times more powerful than the cave abode he had opened up in the past. The stability of the space and the stability of time was even stronger than that of the demon realm and even the Earth universe. Of course, this did not mean that he could open up a world more powerful than the devil realm or the Earth's universe. There were too many things involved, and it was not something that could be fully represented by the stability of the space and time. However, to be able to open up such a powerful cave residence, this was enough to show how extraordinary his means were. Moreover, in addition to the stability of time and space, this cave residence also had some very special features. It was different from the devil realm and even other worlds. Every world had a completely different rule. That was, this cave residence could nourish the intent on Luo Fan's body. As long as he was in this cave residence, the intent on his body that seemed like the holy intents, but was not the holy intents, could continue to strengthen and transform into the real holy intents. Of course, this kind of intent was formed from the essence of his cultivation. Of course, it was impossible to raise it to a higher level by such means. The speed and extent of the increase would definitely be extremely insignificant. However, this was after all a kind of benefit. After all, it also represented the mysteries of this cave residence. But it was already an extremely incredible means. In this cave residence, Luo Fan felt inexplicably comfortable. Sitting in the void, the divine quartz heavenly cauldron shook slightly and revealed the four holy intents directly in front of him. In the past, he still needed to guess and guess when he saw the holy intents, but now he could already directly see the true body of the holy intents. The holy intents did not have a physical body, but they really did exist, an abstract and peculiar existence. In front of Luo Fan, at first glance, they looked like streams of air, but upon a closer look, one would find that it was a world. After a closer look, it looked like a great way, and, in the blink of an eye, it seemed to have turned into a human figure. It was truly indescribably wondrous and unpredictable. After a little identification, Luo Fan found the owners of the four holy intents. Among the four holy intents, the one that belonged to the Divine Lord was the most powerful, had the most changes, and was the most unpredictable. Its eternal and inextinguishable charm was also the strongest holy intent. In addition, the holy intent condensed by the Divine Lord disciple was slightly inferior, but the holy intent contained in the holy intent was still powerful and shocking. Apart from these two holy intents, the other two holy intents were also holy intents, but they were much weaker. Moreover, Luo Fan could faintly see some extremely subtle flaws in the holy intents, as well as some inexplicable heterogeneity that should not have existed. That was obviously the effect of the two holy intents coming from an improper source. Li Hao did not look at the holy intents from an improper source and directly put them aside. With a gentle wave of his hand, the holy intents condensed by the Divine Lord had already come to his side. In the past, once such a holy will approached his body, it would naturally burrow into his body. However, at this moment, even though he was caressing the holy will like this, the holy will did not react at all. In fact, it even seemed to be trying to avoid his touch. With his eyes focused, Luo Fan looked at the holy intents in his hand. He studied the holy intents that seemed to extend out of nothingness and flow into nothingness inch by inch, carefully feeling the existence that might not belong to the holy intents. The holy intents were unpredictable, producing hundreds of millions of strange changes almost at every moment. However, as a whole, these changes showed a kind of eternal and indestructible charm. That scene was so wonderful and strange that it had reached an unimaginable level. The principles revealed in it were so profound that even Luo Fan could not comprehend them. As he carefully analyzed the mystery of the holy intents, Luo Fan's face showed inexplicable enlightenment from time to time. With these kinds of enlightenment, the intents on his body seemed to become more and more solid and more difficult to ignore. In the past, he clearly knew how powerful these holy intents were, and that they contained unbelievably profound mysteries. However, it was impossible for him to fully understand them. It was impossible for him to comprehend anything useful from them. However, at this time, after refining the essence of his cultivation, and with the help of the divine quartz heavenly cauldron, all the obstacles that originally existed were no longer a problem for him. Perhaps it was easier to understand it with a metaphor. The mystery of the level 9 pseudo-sage was like a ball of thread. In the past, when Luo Fan looked at this ball of thread, he could not find the end of the thread at all. He clearly knew that this ball of thread contained diamonds, and clearly knew that the thing wrapped in it could make his family rich and never have to worry about money. But he could not take it out no matter what. Now, facing this ball of extremely tightly wrapped thread, the essence of cultivation that he had refined, the divine quartz heavenly cauldron was like a small hand, pointing to the end of the thread. This kind of pointing, of course, it was impossible for him to completely remove this ball of thread and obtain the treasure wrapped in it, but it had already given him the possibility of removing this ball of thread. In other words, it gave him the possibility of comprehending the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sage. It could even be said that it gave him the possibility of comprehending the mysteries of any level below that of a sage. Immersed in this indescribable enlightenment, Luo Fan felt that his cultivation realm was gradually increasing. In a trance, he did not know how much time had passed. When he came back to his senses, he realized his cultivation realm had actually unknowingly increased by a level. From the original level 4 pseudo-sage, he had directly increased another level. He had become a level 5 pseudo-sage. The whole process was so easy that he could not believe it. It was as if there were no bottlenecks at all before this. After coming back to his senses, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. Yes, there are indeed no bottlenecks in the middle. This is a major realm in itself. In this major realm, even if there are occasional obstructions, they're just obstructions, and there are no bottlenecks. At this moment, he truly felt that he was already completely different from his past self. For him, there were no bottlenecks in the 9 levels of the pseudo-sage realm. As long as he accumulated enough, he would be able to climb up the levels and naturally cross through the various realms. In the end, he would finally be promoted to level 9 pseudo-sage, and even reach the level where he could completely grasp the holy decree. This was a strange intuition that could only be understood, but could not be expressed in words. Sensing this change, Luo Fan sighed. He raised his eyes and gazed into the distance. His gaze penetrated through the layers of barriers of space and time, penetrated through the gaps between the chaotic states of heaven and hell, and directly shone into the chaotic state. He saw the boundless, peerlessly chaotic, magnificent, and boundlessly profound gray haze. At this moment, the range of the chaotic state that he could feel was already so vast that it was indescribable. And the moment he looked, the endless chaotic state naturally transformed into countless combinations and changes in his mind. He had already instinctively used the worldview of laws to explain this chaotic state. This could be said to be a convenience after he had refined the essence of his cultivation, and it could also be said to be a side effect. The essence of his cultivation was originally to form his own worldview and build everything according to this worldview. In the end, he would be able to be independent in the boundless chaotic state and would never be invaded by the chaotic state. Now that he had refined the essence of his cultivation, it was naturally directly connected to his worldview of laws. For this incomprehensible chaotic state, it would naturally be transformed into a state that could be explained by the worldview of laws. How long has it been since I've seen such a scene? Luo Fan smiled bitterly. At this time, he had already reacted. Ever since he entered the demon realm, he had gradually lost himself in it because there were so many powerful existences that were stronger than him. Gradually, he was affected by their cultivation system and lost his insistence on his true foundation. He was almost at a loss to cultivate according to the cultivation system in the demon realm. Although such a cultivation method had allowed him to make great progress from the Tao Master realm to the current level 5 pseudo-sage realm. At the same time, he was also restricted by this cultivation system. Originally, he could even calculate the state of a sage, and he could even boldly build a flawless state according to the state of existence of sage. But recently, he couldn't even understand the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage, and he couldn't even grasp the mysteries contained in a level 9 pseudo-sage. And he himself even felt that this situation was natural, thinking that his realm was not high enough, and he shouldn't be able to understand the state of that realm. How terrifying was this, and how sorrowful was this? Thinking back to his experiences over the years, Luo Fan suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. He had almost embarked on a path of no return. Fortunately, it was not too late to turn back now, and he still had a chance to change. Luo Fan reflected for a while, and a relaxed smile gradually appeared on his face. The will emitted from his body had actually undergone a subtle adjustment. This adjustment did not seem to be much on the surface, and if an ordinary level 9 pseudo-sage studied it carefully, they might not necessarily be able to find anything. They wouldn't feel that there was anything different about it. However, only Luo Fan knew that the nature of this holy decree had completely changed.